Have you all met our Lord and Savior, Rem Lazar? Welcome, everyone.
Was it? He really was here, right? I think. I mean, as usual, he was here when we needed him most. But it was different this time. It felt like he really was here.
Ooh, hype train incoming, nice.
Good morning.
Ram, you're alive! You can talk!
Ooh,
Quixotic vision,
gift
I
subs.
can. I can touch. I can feel. I can hear.
Flower Girl
And I
13,
can
thank you for
see.
subscribing with an 8-month streak.
You needed me.
How?
Jake went on
You
for
believed
7
in
hours
me.
on the John Doyle video. We're not going that long. Bumble Homestead with 300 bits says, love Hannah's pre-show music. From another place, some say outer space, but on some place even higher, Ramblers are. Ramblers are.
I can touch, I can feel, I can hear and see.
Bumble Homestead with 300 bits, thank you. Kirthan with 100 bits. Hey Hannah, if you weren't planning on raiding anyone else at the end of the stream, could we raid Norman Bello? He's playing D&D with my fiance on stream tonight. He's a small streamer and incredibly kind and LGBT friendly. Remind me, and I will try to if they're still going by the time we're done. Chrissia, thank you for gifting 10 subs to the community. Much appreciated. Jouterzen with 60 bits says, here's the rest of my bits until next paycheck. Thank you. She Haikujin with a gift sub. Appreciate it. Enreith with 80 bits says, hi mom. Hello. Steve with a Q with 100 bits repeating my comment about the best stream music. Thank you. Wow, we're already at 50% of the level 4 hype train. Not too bad tonight. The Profane Priestess. Hold on, let me exit that before that plays. Where was that? I missed it. Shoot. One sec. Profane Priestess says, had myself some made-from-scratch pizza. I'm ready for Doyle. And then Doodleburb with 100 bits says, hi, Hannah. Seeing you in a good mood is infectious. I had a good day. I had a lot of fun. Thank you. Which is why I'm actually a little bit late. Mixed Gothy Queer with 20 bits says, next week I guess I'm getting a bonus from my work. I guess they realized I'm keeping the company together during the pandemic. They literally have to close the company when I'm gone. So that's pretty cool. Hope you have been okay the last few days. I have been. Thank you. Slander Sickness with 100 bits. Thank you for the bits. Hey, Sushi Mom. Welcome. Sazzle Cat with 200 bits. Amori Miku with 200 bits says, I went all in on doubting the hype train, so here are my bits. Thank you. The Doyle video is an absolute train wreck. Aren't they all, though? Ghetto Kanye with 20 bits. C. Wyatt with 300 bits. Thank you. Fairly CC with 20 bits says, I can't wait to get frustrated with John Doyle all over again. Lil Money says, hi Hannah, came here from KF Logan 1875. Love you and all you do. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Puka the Duka with 100 bits. Starling CJ, thank you for subscribing with Prime, says, hi Hannah, wanted to say that you and Jake are a part of the reason I'm getting my PhD. I can't wait to share the dissertation on Christian cinema with you both someday. Thanks for everything. Ooh, that'll be good. I'll read that. Bardlock Moses with 100 bits says, here's some bits, won't be able to stay through the stream. That's okay, thanks for the bits though. Wow, we're at 21% of the level 5 hype train. We might actually make it tonight. I didn't think we would. Fun fact, John Doyle says degenerate 9 times in the video. Honestly, in like an hour-and-a-half video, or however long this is, hour 42 minutes, Jesus Christ, he made a feature-length video on how he doesn't want to jerk off. Do you know how many times I could jerk off in the runtime of John Doyle's video on why you shouldn't jerk off? I guess I'd have to experiment to find out. I think it'd probably be hard to finish listening to John Doyle's voice, though. Wiggy the Ultimate Nug with 100 bits. Jeff Mallarts with 50 bits says, can't stay for the whole stream, but I'll be watching on YouTube later. Enreath with 100 bits says, we're gonna do this hype. Doodleburb, thank you for gifting 3 subs. Chrissia with 100 bits says, Jake was even watching at 1.25 speed. John repeats a lot, and Jake had a lot of community discussion. Nice. I'm gonna try and keep it a little more succinct. We might even jump around, just because holy shit. Especially if he covered it thoroughly. Pandaman 1994, thank you for 1,000 bits. Says, here are some butts, or I assume that's supposed to be bits, for Hannah to suffer. Thank you. Windchanter with 100 bits says, finally, the John Doyle sex tape we've all been fantasizing about. Quig the Chig with 100 bits says, save my lats bits for Hannah. Mitchell Drummer with a 7-month streak says, I'm halfway through your review of the Trump prophecy, and I'm very glad you guys had a movie review after all these years. I missed them. I know. We're doing another one soon. Shi Haikujin with 500 bits says, I risked all my channel points. Jeff Malart says, Jeff Mal rhymes with pal, not Paul. Jeff Malarts. God, I always forget that. I'm sorry. I have a lot of people's names to remember, and it slips my mind. I apologize. Handsomest Robot with 100 bits says, just in time for a hype train. Yeah, we're at 155%. I'll have to wear my steampunk hat today. Why do conservatives hate touching themselves if we're not supposed to touch each other until marriage? Do they think it's gay to touch themselves? In fairness, no one wants to touch a conservative. Maybe they just apply their own self-hatred towards everyone else. Muthil with 500 bits says, tomorrow is my 5-month HRT-versary. Here's 100 per month to celebrate. Keep being amazing. Thank you and congratulations. I hope your experience with HRT is going well. Puka the Duka with 100 bits says, bring on the chuds. Dizug with 100 bits says, John Doyle is like the Diet Coke Edward Norton with really bad ideas. Can you add a higher value channel points redemption? I gotta look into it. I don't even know what I can offer you guys. My shades are gorgeous. Thank you. A friend gave them to me. I think they look nice too. I'm gonna take them off soon so my eyes don't get strained looking at the monitor with them, but I thought they looked cool. Did I dig the Karen dolls? What Karen dolls? Jewel Mac with 20 bits, thank you. And Overprotected Atheist with some bits, thank you. I missed Profane Priestess's bits, apparently. From watching this with Jake, I genuinely think John might be ace and sex repulsed. Perhaps. For continuing hype, thank you. Baja says, tell him what you did today. I had a nice girls' day, which is nice. It made me feel very accepted. It was wonderful. And I was given these shades. So it was fun. Watched some bad movies. Ate some pizza. It was fun. Mike Mack says, have you seen what Ted Cruz did when Texas froze over and have no electricity? What else should people expect from Ted Cruz? He's a coward. When any challenge comes along, he always gives up, fleeing away or cowering down and begs for more. Wowzers. Lil Monty with 500 bits again, thank you. Doodleburb with 100 bits says, 100 bits for the fulfilling day, thank you. Windchanter with 20 bits says, those shades, Hannah, chef's kiss. That was great. Cool stuff. So thank you, everyone, for the hype train. We did level 5. Let's get my steampunk D&D character hat. There, I can screw up my hair. Ooh, with these glasses, that's pretty good. Don't you think? Not bad? Okay, I'm gonna take these off, though. Still. Vexicaria, thank you for following. Welcome to the stream. Oh shit, I dropped them. They're okay. I thought maybe we start off with a little bit of MAGA cope for funsies, and then we'll get into the John Doyle bullshit. Turn this music down. I do have a glasses box on my desk, and I forgot. Thank you. Alright, let's start off the stream with some classic manga cope, shall we? I say classic, it's new stuff, but I just mean the segment itself is something that we enjoy very much here on this channel. Let's see what people on the right are talking about today, shall we? Who else would like to be in Cancun with Ted Cruz? If Ted Cruz is there, I don't want to be on the same continent. It's what disturbs me so much about him residing here in the United States. Their own infrastructure, Texas Republicans. Why would AOC do this? I love that they're complaining about the Green New Deal and being like, this is what the Green New Deal does to your energy, like grid. It's like, no, this is what capitalistic deregulation did to our energy grid. What are you talking about? It's so crazy. The liberal media is fawning over AOC and Beto stepping up to help Texas, but won't show the Republicans. Where are the stories of conservative politicians helping out? In an alternate reality where Republicans aren't huge pieces of shit, would be my guess. Private businesses can serve who they want. Account banned. Now take that sign down or you're going in the slammer. What's it say? Whites only. I don't know. I understand the sentiment about like hypocrisy and conservatives, but I don't understand exactly what they're saying. I don't know. To all the Texas liberals, I hope you enjoy your taste of what it's like to live under socialism. What? What are you talking about? They're not under socialism. Texas is a red state. What are they talking about? Chrisio with 100 bits says AOC raised 3.2 million. Nice. There's literally nowhere in the United States that is being governed under socialism. That is not a thing that is happening anywhere in the United States. Socialism is when capitalism does bad things. A suppressed purple state? Yeah. So they posted F. Biden cookies. That's fine. They're allowed to do that. Kind of weird, though. All these Hollywood celeb who are posting disgusting, joyful celebrations on Rush Limbaugh's death. We need to compile a list of these cretins, then let it be known that we'll boycott their commercial endorsements and write to the sponsors. Also boycott their movies and whatever else they do. Oh, good. They've discovered boycotts, or what they like to typically call cancel culture, which it isn't. My hair's getting long. It really is. I like it. I like it a lot. We need to get rid of Cruz. Once you are warm enough, demand his resignation, Texans. You can crawl off your cross any time there, Iris. What was Cruz to do? Raise his hand to the sky and clear the skies magically? You'll just excuse anything, huh? Pretty much. Oh, God. Rush Limbaugh here to return the talent on loan from God. And then Peter pushes a little button under his desk and a trapdoor opens and sends Rush to hell where he belongs. Classic. Are they just throwing a... What is this? They're throwing a Joe Biden book in the store. These people are such children. 12/3/20 to 12/21. Oh, their gas price went up and they think it's Biden's fault? Yeah, you know how the president has a button that changes the gas price? We all know how that works. Doodleburb says it's also pretty telling how they'll excuse Cruz for not helping in a crisis, but they're demanding Biden Dems AOC do something? Yep. Right-wingers are hypocrites. Did you know that? Colossus TV. You break it, you Biden. Pretty good. Pretty good. Job applicants, please note, we do not hire liberals. This is not because we disagree with their political views, it's because working here requires superior reasoning, logic, and reading comprehension skills. Because as we know, conservatives are well known for being well-read. And in our experience, liberals are deficient in those areas. We have found that they make decisions based on their emotions, not logic. This would be very detrimental to our business. We regret any inconvenience this may cause. It'll probably cause you inconvenience since that's illegal. You're not allowed to hire or not hire people based on that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. Mitchell Drummer, thanks for the 40 bits, and 2Man642, thanks for the 7 months. Says I'm ready for the anti-FAP video. Yep, we're gonna get to it soon. This is Donald Trump's comments on Rush Limbaugh dying, I guess. The great Rush Limbaugh. Hold on. How does Donald Trump sound? The great Rush Limbaugh has passed away to a better place, free from physical pain and hostility. To honor his courage, strength, and loyalty will never be replaced. Rush was a patriot, a defender of liberty, and someone who believed in all of the greatness our country stands for. Rush was a friend to myself and millions of Americans, a guiding light with the ability to see the truth and paint vivid pictures over the airwaves. Melania and I express our deepest condolences to his wonderful wife, Catherine, his family, and all of his dedicated fans. He will be missed greatly. That was a bad Trump impersonation. That was one of my worst. Yeah, did you guys know that Limbaugh did a segment on his show where he'd celebrate AIDS deaths? What a dick. This dude wanted an explanation for why he was raised by a single mother and gay, so he made a whole conspiracy theory?
Having a dominant father figure present. The topic I'm about to speak about got deleted by TikTok, but I will speak on it again because it is the truth. Homosexuality is the result of not having a dominant father figure present in that little boy's life. When the little boy does not have a father figure present in his life, he will take on the feminine mechanisms of the woman that he is around, and later on in life, he will seek male sexual connections to feel close to a man. This is why he will have oral sex, and this is why he will have anal sex, all because he is hungry.
You know, straight people can have oral and anal sex as well, right? Just putting it out there. I think you mean to say because he sucks dick and does anal. But again, you can do anal as a straight dude. Have you heard of pegging? Jesus.
For a father. He is hungry for a father because the father was not there to hold that little boy through manhood, to guide him to manhood. The father was not there to hug him, to kiss him, to say that daddy is here for you and daddy got your back. The little boy will want this connection, so he will seek it out in other males to find his father in other males.
No? Maybe they just like dick. Have you considered that? Mike Max 321 says conservatives back then Sorry, the thing keeps scrolling. Conservatives back then, global warming and climate change is not real and we won't need government. Conservatives now. Why is it snowing a lot in Texas and places? Government help us even though we don't do this ourselves. Rush Limbaugh death is nothing but nature fixing itself and he done nothing for this country and humanity. Voss Raven says, my dad was abusive and a huge figure in my house. Parents are still married and I am gay as F. Try again, kiddo. And yes, of course, women can be gay too, so.
This is homosexuality.
I do kind of like that he gestured at himself when he said this is homosexuality. It's just like a gangster Yoda. Oh God. I hate these people. Tomorrow I will post, this is from Milo. It says tomorrow I'll post Shapiro's cell phone number here, and every day after that I'll post another trader's mobile phone number. Long live free speech. Okay. That's kind of funny. Don't do that, though. Don't dox people. That's not okay, even if it's against someone who's kind of a piece of shit, like Ben Shapiro. Ghetto Kanye says, he strikes me as someone who doesn't wash his ass because it's gay. Profane Priestess says, I mean, a lot of gay men are looking for daddies, but that's something else. And then Windchanter says, I really wish we could do an erasure of Rush Limbaugh the way that white community has been erasing black political figures for years. Milo was banned from Parler? Probably for this. This is scary times. What they're doing to President Trump is not unlike what they did to the Nazis, or what the Nazis did in the 30s. The left here is trying to unperson him like the left did to the Jews. And if they can do that to a billionaire and former president, they can and will do it to any of us. Actually, no. It's more like what the government of the Weimar Republic tried to do to Adolf Hitler directly after the beer hall putsch. I never pronounced that correctly. You know, holding him accountable for his actions, but whatever. Now we're back to the stuff that we saw before, but heard about Aunt Jemima like a crazy person. One sec, let me find a different page to see if there's anything interesting. Let's see what some Parler takes are. Oh, no, that's still... Well, the 16th. Trump, Musk, and Tim Berners need to get together and form a new internet. All three hate big tech. Musk is part of big tech. Berners invented World Wide Web and want to make a new World Wide Web 2.0. I don't know how to get a hold of them. Maybe Prager, you could. We're gonna create our own internet with blackjack and hookers. Butterfiend69, thanks for the bits. Says hi chat, hello. And Rublum, thank you for gifting 2 tier 1 subs to the community. Oh, this one's good.
Google's got you. Google's got you. Google's got you. Google's got you.
Facebook, Twitter,
got you. Google
Apple,
got you.
Amazon,
Wing the Ultimate Nug, thanks for gifting biddies.
Instagram, and TikTok. Why did you send to me?
Google's got you.
When I speak out, and you disagree, you deplatform.
Got you. Google.
Ban and fact check me.
Google.
I hooked on my freedom. You say I don't need them.
Good God. Okay, let me check one more Twitter account for material, and then we'll be done with the MAGA cringe, and we'll get to the main event. Dizug, thanks for gifting a sub. Patriot Takes. My senator went to Cancun and all I got was this lousy senator. Jesus. Oh, that's just a political ad. I don't really give a shit about political ads.
Drink.
This woman was arrested after threatening to shoot FBI agents if they tried to question her about being involved in the Capitol insurrection. That's a bad idea.
I'm here to let you know I need a drink.
Oh, God. No, don't do it! Oh, Jesus.
Got a call from the FBI. They want to come talk to me about my visit to D.C. on January 6th. I told them, bro, I ain't gonna talk to you unless I have counsel. And being that I can't afford counsel right now, you're gonna have to arrest me so I can exercise my rights to counsel. And being that you don't even know where I live and you have to ask me, I ain't talking to you either. You just spent 4 years persecuting a 3-star general with no evidence. You think I'm a you come talk to me? I'm an American. I know my rights. My First Amendment right to free speech. My Second Amendment right to carry a gun. To shoot your come to my house. So following me. I don't care. I'm glad you know who I am.
Yep, you don't want to do that.
Friends.
Don't do that. Hey, if there's any rules that I would give anyone, don't threaten federal agents with any sort of violence, much less threatening federal agents with shooting them if they come on your property. That's not okay. Donald Trump keynoting CPAC is a good thing for the conference, is it? But perhaps he should ask them why real Marjorie Greene was conspicuously excluded. Her base is his base, and nobody at CPAC has explained why she's missing. Because she's a loony who hasn't been the president? That's probably why. Whoopsie. Will Joe Biden use nukes against Americans? Probably not. Communist policies are more alive to daw in America than anywhere else in. I've said always that Putin is better states than Obama or Biden. We in American aid the ones who aren't living in freedom. Well, that's either a troll or a very drunk person. Seems like a perfect time for an EBS alert. Man, the QAnon people are still waiting for emergency broadcast system stuff. So ridiculous. When will they learn that it's a cult? The FBI has demonstrated that they are an arm of the DNC, an arm of the CCP. The founders anticipated this, but only offered patriotism as the panacea. It's unfortunate that anti-Americanism is built into the DNC's platform. I would bet you $10,000 he's never read the DNC's platform. Ghetto Kanye says, did you hear they cloned an extinct breed of ferret? Her name's Elizabeth Ann, and they're gonna make some copies of her to act as her sisters. I did hear about that, yeah. It's interesting. You'd have to ask Baha more about it, though. Because I got nothing. It's interesting, though. Bunny. Cute. I think it's funny that a P-word has trapped himself in a cage at White House. You can't make that up. You literally made that up. That's a... Welcome to America. This is your president. And if you don't have the balls to share, it's because you're too afraid to offend your snowflake friends. We're the snowflakes, and you're literally pretending that a different person is the president than is the president? Cool.
The dog. I want to show you something I noticed. Doesn't he look a little rough? I love dogs, but this dog needs a bath and a comb and all kinds of love and care. I've never seen a dog in the White House like this. I remember Buddy, I remember Millie, I remember lots of dogs, but not a dog who seems, I don't know how much love and care he is getting. Let's bring in the historians. I'm having fun with this, obviously, but I do want to talk about some stuff. Craig Shirley, Reagan biographer, presidential historian. Craig, welcome back. And Doug Weed, presidential historian, former advisor to George H.W. Bush. That's the White House where I remember Millie. Millie had like a staff, and they really took care of her. Very beautiful dog. This dog looks like from the junkyard. And I love that dog, but he looks like he's not been well cared for.
No, not at all. Thank you for having us. No, he looks very dirty and disheveled, and very unlike a presidential dog like Millie or Victory or something else in the past in the White House.
Jesus Christ. They're so mean. Apparently that's on Newsmax too, which is wild. I lubricate my AR-15 with liberal cum. Good call. Good call. Okay. We've probably waited long enough. It's probably time to get to the John Doyle stuff, don't you think? Okay, that's the MAGA cope.
We're just gonna die.
Oh boy. Give me a sec. Okay. It's that time of the show. It's time for John Doyle. But this isn't just any John Doyle. This is John Doyle's Magnum Opus. This is John Doyle's 1 hour and 42-minute feature-length diatribe on adult entertainment. So, this video is going to contain discussions of adult themes. If you're not okay with that for whatever reason, or, you know, there are kids within earshot, probably move away from them or have them move away from you. Either way, it's probably going to get spicy in here. So we're going to have some discussions about this stuff while John Doyle, in a suit, fights against the urge to caress any parts of his body, because that boy has a hair trigger, okay? This adult man has not had a release in probably since his last nocturnal emission, when he was like 16. So he's a bit bottled up. And it turns out concentrated coom turns into fascism. So let's find out why he thinks porn's bad.
Dive right into this because I have no idea how to properly start this video, and to be honest with you, I've been pretty anxious about making it, which is why we've been absent for a while, why it's taken so long to put out, because there's so much to cover, and I want to make sure that I do it in a way that is optimally thorough and digestible, and also because very few people actually talk about this issue. So watch it in parts if you have to. Just make sure that you watch the whole thing, because I think that this will end up being one of the most important videos that we've ever done. So I'll just start off by...
If one of the most important things you think you can tell other people is not to touch themselves, You need to find better things to do with your time.
Saying there is no greater threat to the future of our country than pornography. Not socialism, not the left, not big government, pornography.
The communists couldn't take down America, but you know what will? The bang bus.
And I'll prove that to you if you lend me your attention for however long this takes us to get through. Please bear with me, hear me out. But to summarize what I mean by that before we get into all the data and explanations, if you imagine any conflict that you have in your life or that we face as a society, you have to think of it as a zero-sum game. You have to focus on yourself just as much and perhaps even more than you're focusing on your enemy. Like, it's not enough to say, well, you know, they're stupid. They're incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. There's no way they could ever...
Why in the heck in chat? I am shocked that Twitch chat allows you to link to blacked.com or any pornography website for that matter. Like, just without any check. It didn't even ask me to approve that message. Just straight up link to a porn website. God.
Make that work or be successful, because if you're not bringing anything to the table to push back against that, to stand your ground, then it really doesn't matter how foolish you think your enemy is. Eventually they'll conquer you, because any ground that they have gained is necessarily ground that you have ceded. It is a zero-sum game. And the reason this ties into pornography is that pornography is literally making us mentally ill. It is making us depressed. It is making us weak. It's making us numb and pacified. It's making us more impulsive and therefore more susceptible to propaganda. And again, we're going to get into all the data behind
What adult films are you partaking in, John, where you think these things are happening?
This in great detail, but the point is that if you had something like that, something that was literally neurochemically breeding mental illness in practically the entire male population,
breeding mental illness. John, that's not how this works. I assume he'll probably try and cite some studies. I'm very interested if he'll even attempt to cite some study that says... Excuse me. I apologize, I got something stuck in my throat. Anyway, I'm curious if he's going to, like, cite any article that regular, or a journal or something that says that any sort of regular, non-destructive use of pornography in your day-to-day life is going to hurt you in any way. Certainly, like, anything that releases, like, dopamine or any sort of pleasure chemicals, there's the potential that you could get addicted to something. There are absolutely people out there who have porn addictions. Just like there are people out there who have, you know, addictions to anything that can make them feel good. But that doesn't mean that porn as a whole is a bad thing, right? There are things that people enjoy, like a slice of chocolate cake, for instance, that you can enjoy in moderation, that you shouldn't have at the excessive levels that would cause someone to get obese. This is something that I struggle with, and I continue to do so, and I'm trying to work towards a healthier me, walking out on the treadmill and stuff. Good stuff. The point is, everything in moderation, okay? You just don't spend all day, you know, in front of a computer doing the kind of things John is talking about. Most people don't use it in that way. Most people use it in a healthy way where it slots into their life. And not only that, but they can use it with partners. Like, that's a perfectly fine thing to do.
Do you think that those men would ever be able to successfully push back against the left, against socialism, against the big government, against anything, let alone feel
I would push back against the communists, but I'm so empty. I have no coom left in me. I've been jerking off to brazzers all day, and I'm so dehydrated I can't fight the commie menace.
Does that have meaning? No.
A lot of this video is probably just going to be me making fun of his hyperbolic ridiculousness, but, you know, this is the video you signed up for, folks.
No, what has happened to our men in the last 15 years is unprecedented throughout the history of the world. We're the guinea pigs. And what we're finding out is that the results of this are catastrophic for our brains, for our lives, for our society as a whole. And you can laugh at this if you want to, but it doesn't make it any less true. And again, I've got a mountain of data to back this up if you'll just bear with me. But first, I just want you to ask yourself a question, which is just very simply, am I addicted to pornography? You know, we're going to get into the nature of addiction later, but we know that 98% of men have accessed pornography in the last 6 months, and that 80% of men have accessed it.
Wait, do you think that accessing porn more than once in 6 months is an addiction to porn?
Within the last week, ask yourself this question. When's the last time I went over a month without watching pornography, or even 2 weeks? Your answer doesn't necessarily mean that you're addicted, but, you know...
I don't know. When's the last time I drank a Coke? When's the last time I went a month without... I don't know. binging a TV show, like, this matters in terms of, like, when's the last time you went a month without, I don't know, doing something incredibly destructive. You basically have to have a presuppositional belief that pornography is as inherently destructive as these things in order to care.
You were addicted, then the next question would be, okay, is this a bad addiction to have? Am I doing damage to myself, or is it exactly the same as people who just like to look at pictures of puppies all the time, which is an actual argument that we'll address later from the pornography addicts. But for now, if you're a young
I don't think I've ever heard that used as a comparison, literally ever.
man who watches pornography and you just so happen to feel depressed, to feel unmotivated to do things, even things that you used to enjoy, you feel socially anxious, you feel as though you have no control in your life, maybe you seem to have some form of erectile dysfunction, even if you're very young, maybe you don't get morning wood anymore, maybe you've had some encounters with women and you weren't able to keep it up the whole time, or maybe you need to fantasize about pornography or watch it at the same time in order to sustain yourself. Sort of vulgar, so I apologize for that, but maybe you're not even interacting with women, maybe they're not even as appealing to you, you don't feel very good about yourself, you don't have self-confidence, you have trouble concentrating on things, you feel numb in everyday life.
Sure, you'd be describing someone who probably has a legitimate issue with impulse control in regard to their viewership of adult material. That's absolutely a thing that happens. We agree, John, but that's not the typical experience people have.
If this sounds like you, I need you to consider that your use of pornography is likely causing, or at the very least amplifying, some of these problems. And we can prove it scientifically, empirically, logically, anecdotally, whichever way you'd like. And I know this is an uncomfortable conversation to have, believe me. You should.
Not really, I'm an adult. I'm fine with talking about sex. Do you know that adults do that, John?
See some of the emails I get about this stuff, but this is the most important conversation to be having, because there is no greater threat to the well-being of the country than pornography. Because after a few generations of men experiencing the symptoms that we just listed, the country will collapse. Like, it simply can't survive that. No society has ever faced anything like this before. And if you care about this country, then you have to be disciplined. What do we always say? A disciplined mind is an effective mind. Aristotle said, I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies, for the hardest victory is over self. He also said, we are what we repeatedly do. And pornography is an attack on man, and by extension, an attack on the family, and by...
In what way? John, people have been producing pornography for as long as human beings have made depictions of things. Like, pornography is not a new thing. Now, certainly, like all art, like all creative endeavors, whether we're talking about TV shows or plays or movies or books or what have you, all entertainment, especially visual entertainment, has exploded, not just in the last century, but especially in the 21st century. We live in the era of peak TV. We also probably live in the era of peak porn. If you want to go find any random kink, you can go out there and you can find a video of it, and if you can't find it, you can go commission someone to make that for you. We live in an era where there is more porn and more entertainment than there has ever been. I would agree with that, but that doesn't mean pornography is a new thing. People have been looking at porn forever.
Extension, an attack on the society. And if we don't reverse course soon, our civilization simply will not survive. Like, we will be conquered by our enemies. Men who came before you didn't live like this, and you were never...
Men in the 1920s and 30s never ever masturbated. Masturbation was invented in 1976, okay? Did you know that? Jimmy Carter invented masturbation in the Oval Office, and it's all been downhill from there. Would you like to see my peanuts?
Supposed to, because pornography literally causes all of these problems, and we know this because of what we can prove that it does to your neurochemistry, and because of what we can prove that it does to your being. Like, just because it's hard to conduct an experiment with the proper controls, because of how widespread this issue is and how inherently private it is, doesn't mean that you get to be like, no, this has been debunked, sex positive psychologist told me so, no. And even that aside, the studies that we do have...
Are you preempting people debunking your shit by doing a meme? Haha, I drew you with a silly hairdo in a meme. Ergo, your fact-checking doesn't count. Checkmate, libs.
Explore this with the proper methodology, all aligned with our position. So your opinion is invalid. Coom brain. 1,000% increase in erectile dysfunction in the last 15 years. Wonder why that could be. What's changed? It's a real head scratcher, isn't it? The leftist porn addicts that are going to make pathetic response videos to this are going to be like, source, study, shut up, addict.
That's a really, really good rebuttal to not having any sources for your bullshit claims. You're nailing it, John. Please keep going.
You sacrifice the privilege of sympathy when you start rationalizing and trying to normalize your addiction throughout society so as to prevent yourself from realizing how weak you actually are. And that's the thing. They'll say,
John, please just jerk off. For the love of God. I don't think your scrotum can handle the pressure anymore. Please. It's gonna be a disaster either way, but you need to let some of the pressure out or the pipe's gonna burst.
pornography addiction isn't real unless you're watching it at work or in public, things like that, because they need to obfuscate symptoms of extreme addiction as just addiction in order to normalize their perversion throughout society. But to those who aren't coping, to those who don't think they're addicted, or to those who just aren't sure, here's my challenge to you. Detox for 60 days. And if you're not addicted, it shouldn't be a problem, right? And if you don't notice any significant improvements in your life, send me an email. Tell me I'm wrong. I'll send you a picture of myself eating my shorts, my pants. It's winter in Michigan. I'm not wearing shorts. Let's be realistic here. Seriously, why not quit? What do you have to lose? Worst case scenario, you just miss out on 2 months of doing something you like. Wish it were that simple. Unfortunately, it's not. What we're going to be talking about here is incredibly important. We're going to be very thorough, so please listen all the way through. We're going to go through the history and evolution of this problem, the brain chemistry behind the addiction, the negative effects of that addiction on you as it pertains to your mental health, your sexual health, etc. And then we'll get into the negative effects that it has on society as it pertains to the family structure, women, etc. And then we'll debunk some of the most popular things claimed by the people who think that pornography is harmless or even healthy. We'll go over some of the ways that you can quit, and then we'll answer some of the most popular questions that you guys had from last time, because history suggests that we'll bounce back from the current trends in society. History suggests that, eventually the hard times will create the strong men, right? Maybe, but the huge difference now is that
I often get how I think society functions and changes over time from memes. That's usually a good call.
Everyone is pacified, everyone is totally numb. How do you prevent hard times from breeding strong men? Sedate and distract them with pornography, drugs, mass media, consumerism, etc. And it's a huge problem. And if you end up resonating with what we talk about here, I implore you to share this video with every man in your life that you care about, regardless of their age, because it is incredibly important. So do stay tuned. It is imperative.
I hate this intro.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Heck Off Commie. It's officially the most wonderful time of the year. That time of year, the time of the year where I yell at the audience about porn. Love to see it. We knew it was coming. And the idea behind it, for those unfamiliar, is basically that there's this meme called No Nut November that we just got done with a couple months ago. A little late. And the challenge is basically to go the entire month of November without masturbating, which means that a lot of guys see if they can make it a month without watching pornography. And then they almost invariably fail, dismiss it as a stupid internet challenge, and then go about their business. And so I'm here trying to kind of capitalize on some of that momentum, so to speak, along with the fact that it's the new year. People are thinking a resolution.
It's interesting to me that he intrinsically links masturbating with porn. Often those things go together. I'm not disagreeing, especially because in this day and age, the ease of access is crazy. We all have, cell phones in our pocket that have access to the entire internet. And as Avenue Q taught us, we all know what the internet's for. So I find it interesting that he conflates the two when you can, in fact, in theory, watch porn without masturbating, or you could masturbate without watching porn. These are not things you have to do together. Just seems interesting, but whatever.
We're over a month into the resolutions, whatever. I'm trying to explain why you should stop watching pornography. I made one of these about a year ago, but I intentionally didn't watch it before making this to avoid repeating myself as much as possible, because I want this video.
Wouldn't that ensure you do repeat yourself as much as possible? I'd probably watch it just to know, okay, I already covered this, and that. I don't need to cover those again.
Video to be the best articulation of my position now, just like that video was the best articulation of my position then. That being said, I would highly recommend going back and watching the video from last year as well. I'll put a link to it in the description, because tons of people found that video to be extraordinarily helpful and eye-opening. And that's actually, what I kind of wanted to start out with. Firstly, my reasons for being against pornography have nothing to do with my religious beliefs. I was actually against pornography, believe it or not, before I really came into the faith. And I've learned that that's essentially the case with the vast majority.
I find that pretty hard to believe, considering what I've heard about your parents from people who went to school with you, John. But okay.
Majority of people who try to quit doing this stuff. The biggest online community that's related to this stuff did a survey on this and found that only 20% of people said that part of the reason that they were doing this, as far as like quitting it, was for their religion. Like the vast majority of people who are trying to quit are just trying to quit because they're tired of being controlled and weighed down by it. And when I posted a video on this last year, I expected everyone to just get mad at me, but it turns out that almost everyone was on board with what we were saying. And I can't prove this, but I have it on good authority that
John, you always get incredibly positive stuff from your audience because no one outside of your... And we all live in echo chambers. I'm not saying I'm immune to this. Obviously, the people who watch my channel are very much going to agree with me because they already know me, and if they're watching me regularly, it's probably because we share similar beliefs. People tend to surround themselves with entertainment, and people who talk, they surround themselves with people who agree with them, more or less. We like to have our opinions parroted back to us. We like to hear people who are similar to us give their opinions, even if they're slightly different. But like, John, your audience is entirely people like you. They're like alt-right, weird, like, conservative people. Of course people in your audience agree with you. Every video you do has mostly upvotes, just like most of my videos have mostly upvotes, because my audience likes me, and your audience likes you. That's how it works.
we were the catalyst for the pornography debate that happened online about a year ago within the right, because we made a video, then coincidentally, some bigger conservatives made some videos, people started talking about it, all good stuff. It's an important conversation to have, and we have to assert it into the mainstream dialogue because it's a cancer to our civilization. And I'll tell you that since I posted that video a year ago, I've received hundreds of messages, emails, letters from people literally all over the world. Fun fact, we actually have people watching this channel in literally almost every country in the world. There's only a handful that we're not reaching. That's your North Koreas, your Sudans, etc. I just think that's pretty cool. But yeah, I've got
it's YouTube. It's YouTube, John. That's how YouTube works.
All of these responses from people. I've had people come up to me at events with tears in their eyes talking to me about how this issue has affected them. And there's a few reasons that I say this. Firstly, because it's indicative that we're heading in the right direction, that we've identified a serious...
We've taken vulnerable people who actually suffer from an addiction to pornography, and we've used that to funnel them into the alt-right. Hooray! We've done a great job. It's always good to take advantage of vulnerable people, John. You're nailing it.
Problem, and we're helping people solve it. That is obviously very important despite the fact that it receives practically no attention. And secondly, so that if you're struggling with this, which frankly you probably are, you know that you're not alone and that there's no shame in this at all. A lot of times people on the right have this attitude of, well, you're on your own, bucko. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Your problems aren't my problems, snowflake. Sure, there's truth to that. Ultimately, you're responsible for yourself. But that aside, there's nothing conservative about not caring about people or not helping them.
Every other conservative disagrees with you, John. I've never seen a conservative ever really give a shit about another person who has nothing to do with them.
Conservatism properly defined is that which conserves the traditional American society, and that actually requires helping and caring about your neighbors, your family.
The problem is it's not conservative anymore, John. You don't want to conserve where society is. You want to retreat back to a fantasy 1950s Leave It to Beaver fake land where everyone just gets along and the milkman comes and your wife stays at home and cooks you a pot roast. A world that never really existed the way that you people imagine it to be. You're not conservatives. You're not conserving anything. You're regressives. You want to go back into a really bad period of history for the vast majority of people in the country. If you weren't a straight white dude back then, you were having a pretty bad time. John doesn't care, though, and I understand that. But, you know, it's good to point out that he's a piece of shit.
Community, etc. So I will reiterate that there's no shame in pornography addiction, especially considering that what it is quite literally a hijacking of your biological wiring as a man in order to neuroplastically rewire your brain into addiction, all for their profit and ultimately for the destruction of our society. The people run...
That was a lot of words to say. Your pleasure centers get triggered by pornography and you can become addicted to that, and capitalism incentivizing people to get into that and want that reward time after time after time again. Yeah?
Running things have hijacked and exploited our biological drives to pursue food and sex to where we're now fat and addicted to pornography, and that's made us weak. They've made a lot of money doing that. And as we'll get into, the reasons that drugs such as methamphetamine and heroin are so powerfully addictive is that they hijack the precise mechanisms that are designed to regulate sex in the reward center of our brain. In other words, the reason that drugs are so addicting is because they hijack the mechanisms in your brain that are used to regulate sexual desire and co-opt them to compel you to crave more of that particular drug. So
are you literally just describing the pleasure centers of the brain as sex drive centers? because that's not really a complete picture. Obviously, pleasure centers have a role in sex, like releasing dopamine and all sorts of other chemicals like that. But they're not purely for sex. Like, I can, I don't know, what's a good example? Have a nice meal and have pleasure centers, you know, tell me, oh, this is a good thing, I like this. I could watch a TV show I really like and have the same thing, or read a good book. Like, your pleasure centers aren't just sex centers of your brain. It's pretty disingenuous to frame it like that.
Technically speaking, on a biological level, drugs are addictive because they exploit your sex drive, so to speak. So you can understand the cognitive implications of this, pornography, as something that will also exploit your sex drive more understandably, because it exists as something that is an unnaturally exaggerated version of something that you are programmed to find irresistible. These are called supernormal stimuli, which comes from renowned biologist Nicholas Timbergen, who was also a Nobel laureate, and then it is made available to you conveniently and in limitless supply, something that you would never find in nature. There is abundant novelty to what types you can access, and this all causes us to chronically overconsume and resultantly reconfigure our brains to try their best to adapt to this as we become addicted. Drugs are dangerous because they exploit the mechanisms in your brain that exist to regulate your sex drive, and this is incredibly addicting. And then the same thing happens when you have pornography in the way that we do now. It does practically the same thing to your brain, and we'll go through this step by step, but this is why even heroin addicts will tell you that shooting up feels like an orgasm when you talk to one, I don't know, your circle. And this is also why the brain scans of drug addicts are very similar to the brain scans of pornography users, but not addicts. That's what they'll say. But the truth is that there are basically two types of pornography users: those who will become addicted and those who already are addicted. And then within the latter category, you have those who know.
So everyone who ever uses porn, whether it's someone who uses porn once a week or once a month or once every 2 weeks, they're a porn addict? What are you talking about? This would be like me saying everyone from someone who has one beer once a month or something and comparing them with someone who drinks a fifth of vodka a day. These are not equivalent things, John. There are people, I would argue most people who engage with adult content online or elsewhere do so in a healthy way. Why are you saying that anyone who engages with this stuff is automatically addicted? What are you talking about?
They're addicted, and those who don't know or perhaps refuse to accept that they're addicted. And we'll get into that, the neurochemistry behind that shortly, to explain kind of what's going on in your brain. But I say this now to really just emphasize that...
Does John think animals don't masturbate? Because the way he's talking about that, this makes it sound like he thinks animals, and even things that are the closest related to us, like chimps or bonobos, does he think these animals, in the absence of porn, don't touch themselves and pleasure themselves? Because animals do that. Humans do that. It's a normal thing that animals do, at least mammals, because of how our sex drives tend to work. It's not out there for animals to do that. It's normal.
There's no shame in pornography addiction because your brain is just simply not capable of handling that level of stimuli. Now, that being said, there is great shame in evangelically pretending that it doesn't exist. The so-called experts, the sex-positive experts. These are people who say things like, this claim has been debunked. This study says otherwise. And we'll address the most popular arguments from these people at the end.
Again,
and by the way,
his rebuttal to people telling him that these sources are saying he's wrong is this image. Here are sources that say you wrong. But have you considered I put a picture on the screen of the meme man doing a cry? Checkmate, leftists. Maybe that is John Doyle and it's just cum coming out of his eyeballs because he's so backed up. His eyes are red because they're full of cum.
I have anecdotes that can be corroborated thousands of times over online from people who have experienced this stuff.
Thousands of people on internet said a thing. Wow. What a great sample size, considering the internet has hundreds of millions to billions of active members.
But I also have lots of data to back up what we're talking about here. But for now, what I'll say is this. I don't listen to degenerates. I just don't. And the reason for that is very simple. And it's that...
Wait, you hang out with Nick Fuentes all the time, and he did it with a cat boy. What are you talking about?
As human beings in the pursuit of virtue and truth, we can only reach the truth if we conquer and have total control over our desires. Otherwise, we will view everything through the lens of our desires, since we do not have control over them, but rather they have control over us. And given that sexual desire is the most powerful desire that we have as human beings, I refuse to listen to degenerate people argue in favor of degenerate things. Because what is very likely happening is that...
Don't you love when Nazis just straight up use, like, Nazi terminology and start calling people dirty degenerates and stuff? Makes my job so much easier. I don't have to make any funny jokes. I just get to point at the thing and be like, yeah, you know, he's saying the thing. He's saying the thing out loud.
That they have a proclivity towards whatever aids in or alleviates the guilt from that desire, and that ultimately distorts the truth. You wouldn't listen to a heroin addict talk about why heroin isn't actually a bad thing. You shouldn't listen to a porn addict argue the same.
The problem is that you've presuppositionally decided that any single person who engages with pornography at any level, at any rate, is an addict. That's the problem. You've painted anyone who uses porn with a brush so broadly that the definition of addict means absolutely nothing at this point. It just means a person who uses porn, even semi-regularly. That's ridiculous.
Are corrupt.
Like, imagine if I tried to do the same thing, John. Imagine if I made a video that was an hour 40 minutes long on how guns are terrible and destroying the country, which I don't necessarily believe, by the way. I'm fine with gun ownership, but I am in favor of, like, reasonable restrictions on certain things. But either way, imagine I made a video that's like, guns are destroying the country, and then someone who actually has knowledge of guns, because I don't, and I don't claim to have, like, a vast knowledge of firearms, comes to me and says, actually, you know, here are things that I think are good about guns. Here are technical aspects that you don't understand about guns. And I went, I'm not going to listen to a gun addict tell me about guns. And then they're like, what are you talking about? I don't even own that many guns. I just, every once in a while, once a month, I go to the shooting range, and I enjoy doing it, and I want it for home protection. And I go, anyone who has a gun or ever engages with a gun is a gun addict. I'd get called a dipshit. I'd be called ridiculous, because that's a terrible argument.
By their desires, and they are rationalizing it. This is the part where the irrelevant streamer pauses the video and says, is John Doyle really comparing heroin addiction to pornography addiction? All the only couple thousand viewers watch me pretend to stare blankly at the screen before looking at the camera like Jim from The Office. No, I'm not actually comparing the effects of heroin to the
It's a good impression. Both of me and Jake.
Effects of pornography, because the effects of pornography have far worse implications on our society. We'll get into that. But even
Did he just say porn is worse for society than heroin addiction? Oh, John.
That in itself proves my point, because there's this subculture of these really gross and vulgar leftists who exist online to let me live in their head rent-free. They do these group therapy sessions where the fattest and the grossest one tries to bully me, which is impossible, by the way, because you can't bully me. You just can't.
Oh, no! I think he's really mad at Jake. Or me too, which is possible. That's fine. Love you too, John.
I'm too epic. You're an addict. You're literally an addict who's coping. And they're so corrupted by their desires that they simply can't imagine living without that.
I'm gonna be real. I know Jake pretty well. I don't think he looks at porn that often. He might, sometimes. But not that often. He does bang on the reg, though. That dude has a libido that is off the charts. Like, he's engaging in sexual activity with his girlfriend all the goddamn time, okay? And that's great. I'm happy for them. I find it weird that you're calling Jake like a porn addict, though, because I don't think he engages with porn often. He doesn't feel the need to.
Occupying their consciousness because they're...
He said as much yesterday? Yeah, sounds about right.
Slave. And so they'll say stuff because I'm a proponent of sexual morality. I detest hookup culture. And so they'll say, John Doyle's just mad because girls don't like him. He needs to get laid. And you look at these guys.
I do think you should get laid, but I don't think that's why you're mad. I don't. I think you're mad for a lot of different reasons. I think your sexual frustration isn't helping, and that's certainly a thing, but no, I think it more has to do with the way you were raised by your parents. The fact that you're a religious fundamentalist, that's not helping. I imagine you feel a lot of shame around sex. I don't know. It's not healthy, but I don't think that's why you're mad.
Guys, like, really? You and I go out to a bar or something, you think girls are going to be coming up to me like, oh my God, who's your friend over there? No, you're coping. Like, maybe, man to man, maybe you're picking up girls that are like high threes at best. You think you're winning somehow. Actually, I kind of feel bad for these guys because it's like, it's one thing if you're a good-looking guy, you're charismatic, you decide to exploit that to go hook up with a bunch of attractive girls. I still think that's wrong, but like, I can understand that. Whereas these guys are hooking up with like these gross, overweight, feminist types, and it's like, it can't be because you think they're hot. So it's just because you are so addicted to lust that you are willing to resort to hooking up with girls that look like defective Pokemon to fulfill that desire.
Jesus Christ, John! Oh my God! How does he still have a channel? He's so awful! Oh.
Can't respect that. You have no self-control. That's why you're fat. That's why you hook up with gross women. You have group therapy sessions during which you and your other degenerates all get together and try to bully me because it makes you feel less guilty about your behavior and lifestyle, and it makes you feel less threatened by me and the boys. So don't care, didn't ask.
John has not been having a good time since Trump lost the election, has he? Everything is going downhill for him. He is freaking out.
Plus, you're an addict. You don't like me. You don't like my audience. You don't like America. You don't like Jesus because we're all epic and you're not, and you're insecure about it. But it's okay. We're going to try to help you out too, because at the end of the day, we still care about you. So let's jump into it. We have data, but keep in mind this problem is becoming so accelerated and widespread that we're not going to be able to wait a few decades to decide that it's terrible. And the way that we did with cigarettes, we have to actually act quickly. And so, you know,
he thinks porn is more dangerous than cigarettes. Oh, John. John really wants to... You think John ever watches The Handmaid's Tale as aspirational viewing material? He must have seen it at this point, right? Does he want to be like mayor of a town in Gilead? He could have like a little cabal of a little harem of handmaids or whatever.
One of the first things we mentioned was that 98% of men have accessed pornography within the last 6 months, 80% just within the last week. For reference, that means that statistically 4 out of the last 5 guys that you've spoken to are watching pornography at least once a week.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common.
That's where we're at now, roughly speaking. Let's talk about where we were. We used to be like a decade ago. We're focusing on guys younger than 30, by the way, since our brains have been the most harmed by this since they caught us when our brains were the most plastic. So in 2008, the percentage of boys who had been exposed to pornography before they were 13 was 14.4%. In 2011, it jumped to 48.7%.
I don't believe that stat at all. No offense. But I would absolutely agree that it's probably gone up since the advent of the internet. But the internet was a thing a decade ago, right? The internet was still a thing. I don't believe that poll. I don't believe that poll even a little bit.
In 2017, there was a study done on people ages 15 to 29 that found that 69% of males had been exposed to pornography at age 13 or younger, and also that virtually all of the men by this point had viewed pornography at some point. So the average age at which boys are exposed to pornography is decreased.
Why is it just boys, too? Does he know people who aren't men look at porn? I'm not even necessarily talking about me, because I know John doesn't like trans people, but, like, everyone I've dated in my life, and I've only ever dated women, have also looked at porn. Maybe John doesn't know that, because John, I don't know if he's ever had a girlfriend, and if he has, I doubt it's, you know, someone who's going to be open about sex stuff, but, like... I've never dated someone who doesn't watch porn.
Increasing each year, but it's widely regarded to be 11 years old, which means that if we assume a normal distribution, 50% of boys are exposed to pornography when or before they are 11 years old. To help you realize how utterly insane and dangerous that is, here is a stock photo of an 11-year-old boy. Another thing to note is that of online pornography consumption done by minors, fully 22% of that is done by children younger than 10. That's almost a quarter of it. In 2008, the percentage of adolescents who viewed pornography every day was 5.2%. By 2011, it was over 13%.
Okay, and if you want to do something about that, that's fine. If you want to put some sort of tougher regulations on how porn is accessed on the internet, like obviously right now it's basically a system where you, I don't know, put in, you know, you just say, oh yes, I'm 18 or whatever. Otherwise, that's it. And anyone can click that. If you wanted to figure out some way that's more secure, that would be okay. I wouldn't have a problem with that. Because I could understand not wanting your kids to watch porn, you know? However, I do think if you're like 16, 17, I don't know, is it not normal for 16 and 17-year-olds to watch porn? John, of course, is going to say no. But, like, do you think, again, historically, that 16 and 17-year-olds don't jerk off? This seems a little odd.
2017, 39% of males between 15 and 29 viewed it daily. So the trend suggests that each year more people are watching it more often and at a younger age. And there was...
I would guess... Sorry, give me a sec. If I had to guess, I would think also the self-reporting rates have probably gone up just because as a society we've continued to get more open and honest and understanding about sexuality being like a natural thing. So I think in the past people probably would have been a little bit more ashamed to admit, oh, I watch porn or I watch porn at this age or whatever. Whereas nowadays I think people are like, yeah, sure, watched all sorts of porn, whatever.
There's nothing to suggest that the trends are going to reverse or halt themselves. That's not good. And the problem that we have isn't exactly pornography in general. Like, there was a time in this country when the best case scenario, especially for young men, was like the Sears catalog, maybe a Playboy that you paid way too much for and then buried in your closet. But we have to understand that what we're dealing with now is...
John, do you understand that Playboy and Penthouse have existed for quite a while? And even before then, you could go and get raunchy material. There were adult bookstores long before those.
Tremendously different than that, and it is something that we've never had in the history of the world, let alone the history of our society. And for the last decade or so, we have been witnessing the effects of it. And a lot of people might think that I'm just like out of touch or something.
You are. You're also historically illiterate to think that people haven't had access to porn previously. Like, every time a new technology comes into existence, whether it's the advent of the moving picture or the novel or the printing press, you know what that shit gets used for? Making smut. People love smut. We're monkeys. You know what monkeys like to do? They like to jack off.
Don't get me wrong, like, if I had a son and my wife was like, I caught our son and his friends looking at a crumpled Polaroid photograph of a boob behind the garage, I would just laugh. I really wouldn't care. Women just tend to feel negatively about this type of stuff as a general rule.
I'm glad John's here to speak for all women.
They're not exactly wrong in that. We'll come back to that later, but the point is that you had magazines, maybe pictures, still images, and then you had a finite amount. Then maybe you had some X-rated movies, but you still have to go to adult bookstores to watch clips, those weird theaters that play them. Not exactly a comfortable experience. Then maybe, you know, you've got VHS tapes, then you actually have to go get VHS tapes, you have to buy it. It's a weird experience. You have to watch it. You can't just like skip around. You can only watch one at a time unless you have multiple televisions with multiple VHS players or the late night cable channels, but even then you actually have to watch the whole thing. You can't skip around. Maybe you can like watch other channels, but still, as a general rule, you had to jump over hurdles to access pornography. And even then, it wasn't as good per se as what we're dealing with now. Then we had dial-up, which was cheaper, less expensive. You had more privacy, but it was still mostly just pictures. They would take forever to load. You couldn't just consume at a click. And if you wanted videos, you'd have to download stuff, but you know, maybe you don't have the right software. Then you're risking getting a virus. It was still a relatively complicated process. Then 2006 happened, high-speed internet exploded, and everything got bad. That's when you started getting tube sites that had videos like YouTube, except it's pornography.
Nothing else was happening in America post, let's just pick a random date. I don't know, what's a random date pre-2006? Let's say the 11th of September 2001. Nothing else in the country has happened past that random date that has affected anything in terms of the direction the country has gone. It's entirely because people started masturbating to pornography on the internet.
And society basically...
Did you know that jerking off literally created the Patriot Act? Literally. George W. Bush jerked off onto a piece of paper, and it just literally wrote out the Patriot Act in its entirety. Crazy stuff.
Teed itself up to collapse. And here we are about 15 years later dealing with the consequences of that. High-speed internet and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. But yeah, kind of a weird timeline to go through, I guess. But
says a guy who is literally making his entire living pushing right-wing propaganda using high-speed internet. The irony. I can't.
It's important to what we're about to get into with the addiction component, because it is because of this evolution that it has become so pervasive in our society and so incredibly addictive. It's not clear to me at all that something like this could have ever happened with the Sears catalogs or the Playboys that we mentioned earlier, let alone to this degree of addiction, let alone to this degree of pervasiveness, and let alone to this degree of exposure to our children, who really end up suffering the most in terms of how it damages their brain, but also in terms of how it damages their family and the society that they'll have to grow up in and live in for the rest of their lives. Like, it's one thing if you're a 50-year-old guy who discovers online pornography in 2009, but to be exposed to this as a child while your brain is developing, your entire generation is in the same boat, all the men in your life are watching it, even if they're not as negatively affected as you are. Like, no one wants to have this conversation. It's a big problem, and this isn't...
People talk about porn addiction. Porn addiction is a thing. I think that even came up, like, in my sex ed at school. That was a thing that was discussed. Like, it's okay to watch porn, but hey, there are limits, and just like anything, they even went over the whole, like anything, your brain can become addicted to things that cause you pleasure. Lifetime did a whole shitty Lifetime movie on this. I think it was called, like, Cyber Seduction or something. It's actually a very funny movie. If you like bad movies, it's pretty good. But anyway... The point is, this is a problem that gets talked to with kids. As long as you're open with your kids about this stuff, yeah, people talk to them. Also, as a parent, I'd argue that's your responsibility, too. Like, telling your kids, hey, it's natural to, like, and again, John's going to disagree with this, but I think it's reasonable as a parent to talk to your kids once they're old enough and be like, hey, this is a thing. If you're going to do it, that's your business, that's fine. Just make sure you're, you know, respecting other people's boundaries and doing it privately because other people don't want to be involved in that. And do so, you know, in a reasonable amount. I don't know. I'm not a parent, as you can tell. Either way, my point is, yeah, John's pretty out of touch on this one. Antipodian Squid with 2,500 bits says, celebratory pride biddies for one of the best trans influences on the internet, because I was brave and got myself some trans NB healthcare today. Ooh, good for you. Good job. I'm glad you're going to be covered.
Even taking into account the gateway to pornography for your children that is social media, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok especially, it's all terrible. If you're a parent, download the apps, look around for 10 minutes. You'll see exactly what I mean. And also what your kid is looking at every day. But anyways...
Won't someone think of the children?
This is the part where we get into the nature of pornography addiction, so fasten your seatbelt. Some of this stuff is pretty dense, but we'll do our best, right? So first we have to summarize basically what pornography does to your brain in terms of addiction. We'll start at the very tip of the iceberg. So first, know that pornography does measurable damage to various parts of your prefrontal cortex. The good news is that this damage has been shown to be impermanent if the addiction is broken, but the bad news is that it makes it incredibly difficult to break and even acknowledge the reality of the addiction. For example, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is associated with self-discipline, self-control, and compulsivity, will lose tissue and cause you to be more compulsive with your decision-making. The ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is associated with self-monitoring of behavior, will also lose tissue and cause you to have impaired self-monitoring, which basically means that you'll be less aware of what you're doing, which will make you less able to hold yourself accountable and behave properly. The medial prefrontal cortex, which is associated with your awareness of your physical and emotional state, will also lose tissue and cause you to be more likely to be in a state of denial about your problem and to instead prioritize pursuing your addiction. And also your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is associated with motivating you to pursue that which is beneficial to you, will be damaged as well and cause you to be instead motivated to pursue your addiction. So
I know he already made fun of the idea of asking for sources because apparently he was too lazy to provide any sources in his, you know, description or anything. But yeah, I'm going to have to say source. I'm not even necessarily disagreeing. I would imagine someone who is actually addicted to porn would probably have these problems. But again, if you're going to claim that, like, everyone who engaged with pornography in any way, shape, or form has these issues to the level that they're actually detrimental to their day-to-day life, that probably needs a source. You at least need to say, according to, even if you don't, like, provide an actual link in the description, you should say, according to such and such journal, according to such and such medical text, according to this website that I looked at, whatever the website was.
That's very important to note. And moving on, we get into the fact that basically you're classified as a mammal. And technically speaking, rats are also mammals. But since we're on Team Human, we don't want to do potentially unethical testing on ourselves. So instead, we do a lot of testing on rats because they spawn quickly, they're inexpensive, they're easy to house. Most importantly, though, they're very closely related to us in terms of biological and genetic makeup. And for that reason, you can replicate a lot of symptoms of the human condition in rats. And there's something observed in rats, but also in many other mammals, that has been called the...
Chrisia with 100 bits says the study he's citing did not establish a causal link. It studied porn addicts, but did not know if these were naturally smaller. So they don't know if it was a chicken or egg thing. Were people with these areas of the brain that function differently more susceptible to becoming porn addicts, or did the porn addiction cause these issues? Gotcha.
The Coolidge effect, and it is an example of how continuous sexual novelty can drive the behavior of mammals. So if you take a male rat, put him in a cage with a female rat, he's going to assert himself because rats don't have a Me Too movement, and he will continue to...
Really? That's the joke we're going with? Jesus Christ.
Assert himself until...
Haha, isn't it funny? Because rats can just fuck each other. Haha, isn't rape funny? I'm not saying the rat is doing that, I'm saying the human equivalent would be that. John, you fucking ass.
He gets bored, and even, if the female rat is like, what are we? He'll just be done. He'll be totally bored with her, doesn't want anything to do with her. But then if you throw in a different female rat, he will reassert himself with her until he gets bored again. You can literally repeat this process with new female rats until the male rat collapses from exhaustion. This is because his top genetic priority is reproduction, and new female rats allow him to do that. Now, of course, human beings are a bit more sophisticated than rats. We actually have a Me Too movement. Our mating process is more complex, and we're part of the about 5%.
John, if your joke is predicated on why can't I just do anyone at any time without their consent, probably edit that joke out.
Of mammals with the capacity for long-term bonds, but our brains are still affected by the Coolidge effect, which gets its name from President Calvin Coolidge, based. And the story goes that he was touring a farm with his wife, and the farmer showed his wife a rooster that spent all day, every day mating with hens, and his wife supposedly said, "Tell that to Mr. Coolidge," and so the farmer did, and then Coolidge responded by asking if it was with the same hen. The farmer said no, and he replied, "Tell that to Mrs. Coolidge." Pretty epic joke. Women take the L yet again. But anyways, the takeaway is that continuous sexual novelty tends to drive the behavior of mammals, with the idea being that your best case scenario for continuing the bloodline is if every female is pregnant. Now, young man, this desire that you have to get every female pregnant arises largely from a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine amps up the centerpiece of a very primitive part of your brain known as the reward circuitry, which is where you get your cravings and your pleasure, but also your addictions. This part of your brain is what makes you want to do the things that keep you alive and get women pregnant, basically. As a human, your list of priorities are like food, sex, love, friendship, novelty. These are called natural rewards, and they are different from addictive chemicals. But the problem is that addictive chemicals can hijack the same circuitry in your brain as we talked about earlier. So the whole reason that you have dopamine is to motivate you to do whatever serves those interests, basically. Lots of dopamine when you eat candy, not a whole lot when you eat cauliflower. That's just the way it works. Tells you where to direct your attention and what to pursue. And it also helps you remember those things by rewiring your brain via new or stronger nerve connections. And sexual stimulation and orgasm add up to the biggest natural release of dopamine and opioids available to your reward circuitry, so you can start to see why we need to be careful. Because a lot of people describe dopamine as the pleasure chemical. That's not actually accurate, because it's much more about seeking and searching for that pleasure, not the pleasure in itself. As you get closer, your dopamine rises with anticipation, and it motivates you to keep going towards whatever you want.
Sure, but there are different chemicals. Serotonin and stuff gets released when you actually achieve whatever goal you're going towards.
That's immediate pleasure or long-term goal, and it does this by attaching to receptors in your brain to stimulate electrical impulses. What you end up feeling as the actual pleasure is the release of the opioids, which also bind to the receptors in the reward circuitry of your brain. So dopamine compels you to find water, and then opioids are the relief feeling that you get upon quenching your thirst. Dopamine is what makes you want to get the female pregnant. Opioids are the feeling that you get upon doing so. You get the point. Dopamine makes you want stuff. Opioids make you like stuff. But the problem with that is that they aren't so easily separated in our brains. So dopamine causes us to desire and seek things, but dopamine is also a stronger system than our opioid system, which means that we're always seeking more than we are satisfied. And the reason for that is that seeking and desiring is more likely to keep us alive than just sitting around satiated, satisfied in a daze doing nothing. But the problem is that this imbalance, when overstimulated, leads ultimately to addiction, because the desires and the cravings increase while the pleasure you get decreases. So you want something more and more, but you don't like it as much as you used to, so you compensate by craving more of it, and the cycle continues. Another thing that we mentioned earlier that plays a big role here is novelty. That's the Coolidge effect. Dopamine surges for novelty. Without novelty, it diminishes over time. They've done studies where they'll show a group of men part of an X-rated movie and measure their dopamine, and it gets lower every time they play it back, and then they play part of a different one and it shoots right back up. And it's also true that men will ejaculate faster in greater volume and with faster sperm when viewing a new naked girl pretty as opposed to the same one. So basically your brain can't tell the difference between watching pornography and having sex. And so in the span of a shameful afternoon with a few extra tabs open, you can have more sexual partners according to your brain than your ancestors would have had in their entire lives. And if you think...
Yeah, that's true. The same thing applies to a lot of the other stuff in our lives. Today, I can open a tab on the internet and go read more news than anyone, like, more information on the world than people in previous generations would have ever had access to easily. I can do the same thing with the number of movies I have access to and the number of books and stuff. That's sort of how it is in the future. We have access to all sorts of stuff. It just depends on what you do with that. Again, porn addiction is a real thing that people have, and it's serious, but to imply just because people have access to a huge amount of pornography that they are inherently addicted regardless of the amount of it that they actually, what's the word, take in, use, watch, whatever. I don't know, it just seems stupid. It implies that, like, anyone who plays video games is automatically addicted to video games because there's more available today than there ever have been. Or if you watch movies, you're addicted to movies because they're more easily available than ever. It's not really how that works.
Think your brain has the hardware to handle this, you are mistaken. This gets back into the supernormal stimuli that we touched on earlier, because it's not just the endless novelty that makes this so bad, but also the adjacent emotions and stimuli as well, since dopamine also fires up for things like surprise or shock factor, violations of your expectations, you never thought you'd see something like this, anxiety, maybe this goes against your values or even your sexuality, also generally searching and seeking things out. All of those things, of course, are rampant in pornography, and many of them not only elevate dopamine, like anxiety, shock, surprise, shame, etc., but they also boost your stress hormones and neurotransmitters, and that ends up increasing your excitement and amplifying the effects of the dopamine. And over time, I kid you not, your brain can start to confuse feelings of anxiety or riskiness with feelings of sexual arousal. And this explains why pornography addicts often escalate into watching more extreme and more shocking content, because they need that extra neurochemical boost. It also explains why if you've ever felt suddenly stressed out by something and your first instinct is to watch pornography, you're like, what the hell? It's because you built that association.
What? I've never had that happen to me. Again, John is probably describing an actual thing that happens to real porn addicts. But porn addicts are not the majority of people who watch porn. Why are you acting like they are, John?
In your brain. The common phrase is neurons that fire together wire together. And if you amplify the effects of the dopamine with these neurochemicals, then what's going to happen is that. And then when something totally random happens to you that stresses you out, has nothing to do with that, you'll feel compelled to watch pornography because you've rewired your brain, literally. Your brain will have confused anxiety or riskiness for sexual arousal. Speaking of stress, there's this myth that pornography is good because it relieves stress. First of all, you have to laugh at the utter state of the coon brain. Like, yeah, dude, that's why you're watching porn 10 times a week. You're just stressed out. It's like, no, go for a run, take a bath, do something else. Like, at least be honest with yourself that watching pornography to relieve stress is just you trying to justify your addiction. And that aside, it doesn't actually relieve stress because, as we'll get into, it literally rewires your brain to make you more miserable. So even if you can achieve that temporary relief, it will soon go away, and your baseline levels of stress and general despair are going to be much higher if you're using pornography. And I have to stress this point again, which is that given the incredibly addictive nature of pornography and how widespread that addiction is in our society, it's not only possible, but probable that anyone arguing its benefits is only trying to justify their addiction. It really...
It's easy to win arguments when you just decide that anyone who disagrees with you is automatically invalid in their opinions because you classified them as an addict and therefore their opinion doesn't matter.
It is that simple. I would never listen to a cigarette addict tell me that cigarettes are good, or at the very least not bad, the same way that I would never listen to a pornography addict tell me that their addiction is the same. Like, their judgment is clouded by the addiction. Their prefrontal cortex has been damaged and compromised. We just went over the details of that. But back to the supernormal stimulus. The concept we discussed earlier, basically the danger lies when you have something that is registered in our brains as especially valuable to us, something that is an artificially exaggerated version of something that our brains are wired to find irresistible, and then that is available conveniently in limitless supply, which could never be found in nature, and it comes in limitless varieties. That's the novelty we talked about earlier. And as a result of these things, we're chronically over-consuming it.
None of this applies, and Baha made a good point too. Baha said, where did it go? Something along the lines of, if I sleep with my girlfriend every week, does that mean I'm addicted to her? Everything he's saying, because he's comparing this so strongly to, like, actual interpersonal sexual activity, and saying that it's hijacking those same systems, would this not apply to regular sexuality as well? That wouldn't just be a porn thing, then. The same exact thing would apply to human people in real life. John, when you get married and you have sex with your wife, are you addicted to your wife because you sleep with your wife regularly? Are you going to feel the need to escalate that because it's just not enough anymore? Doesn't really make sense when you apply it backwards, the way that you were trying to push it forwards by comparing porn addiction to how your brain treats other things. Just seems weird.
There are two components in our society that first come to mind when talking about this. First one is junk food, and then pornography. Junk food is already recognized to be a supernormal stimulus. We're all fat and gross as a result of it.
I am.
And there's an argument to be made that the government subsidizes junk food so that we're all too fat and lazy to do something about it. Of course, I would never make that argument, the same way that I would never make the argument that the government enables widespread pornography access in order to keep us depressed, pacified, and distracted, because
Oh no, he's doing the thing where he says he doesn't think the thing, but he actually thinks the thing. Does John think that agricultural subsidies to corn farmers, and I don't even understand how he thinks the government is helping people get porn. We're not subsidizing Pornhub as far as I know. So how does he think that's working? You think the government is sending me Pornhub links to try and keep me subservient? It's not working too well. I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden. Anyway.
I know that the government always has my best interest at heart. I live in Michigan. Are you kidding me? The point is that pornography is actually a more potent supernormal stimulus than junk food is, simply because of its nature. Namely, the fact that it costs less, can be accessed with a few clicks at any time from practically anywhere. There's no precise physical limits on its consumption, whereas you have to eventually stop eating because your stomach has a capacity. You can just keep watching pornography.
Oh, John. No, you cannot keep watching pornography indefinitely. For one thing, oh God, I can tell John isn't... John, there are physical limits as well for people with testicles and penises. There are physical limits there as well for a variety of different reasons. Let's put it that way, shall we?
Until you pass out or something. This is where we get back into the parallels to drug addiction and also the rats, because we actually have research that shows that
you'd get sore, among other things.
Amphetamine and cocaine hijack the same reward center nerve cells that evolved for sexual conditioning. And some of these studies have shown that sex to completion shrinks the cells that pump dopamine through the reward circuit, and also that those dopamine producing nerve cells shrink with heroin addiction. So
again, everything you're saying here would apply to regular sex as well with your wife.
What does that mean? Well, the reason that drugs like methamphetamine and heroin are compelling is that they hijack the precise mechanisms in our brain that are designed for sex. So while it's true that there are other pleasures that activate the reward center of our brain, the fact is that the nerve cells don't overlap nearly as closely as they do with sex, which is why non-sexual natural rewards feel different and less compelling. So sex is the most compelling given the hardware of our brain, and drugs are incredibly compelling because they hijack that hardware and overload it, basically. And so sexual arousal and orgasm induce higher levels of dopamine and opioids than any other natural reward, but there are other components below our conscious awareness that play a role as well. For example, there's a protein that accumulates through sex and drug use called delta phos-B, and it activates genes involved with addiction, and the molecular changes that it generates are nearly identical for both sexual conditioning and chronic use of drugs. So regardless of what you're abusing, high levels of delta phos-B accumulate and rewire the brain to pursue more of that thing, which is how addictive drugs co-opt the learning mechanisms in our brain that are designed to make us pursue sexual activity. And by the way, this is related to why if you look at brain scans of drug addicts compared to brain scans of pornography users, but not addicts, they're practically identical. But anyways, the climax effects of that sexual activity causes lots of temporary neurological and hormonal changes to occur, upon which I don't really care to elaborate since the political implications from the neurochemistry of the orgasm, heck off commie, is something that I was really looking forward to covering at a later time. That's the highbrow content that the people want. But we do know that these changes do not occur with any other natural rewards, and we know that this is done by our brains so that we know the difference between sexual activity and drinking a milkshake. But we also know that dopamine plays a very significant role in this. And we'll actually just debunk this right now because there's this common argument about pornography addiction and dopamine, and it's literally, well, lots of different things raise your dopamine levels, so there's no difference between watching pornography and watching a sunset. And we actually tested that.
I've literally never heard anyone make that argument in regard to like actual pornography addiction. There are absolutely people with pornography addictions.
A theory about 20 years ago, and it turns out that it's total BS. We did a study with brain scans, and it found that cocaine addicts had nearly identical brain patterns when viewing images of pornography and images of crack pipes, and also that everyone had the same brain activation patterns for viewing pornography, so connect the dots there. And finally, that the patterns were completely different for looking at sunsets. The point being that drugs and sex can activate the sex neurons in your brain without actual sex, and sunsets can't, you idiot. It is obvious that our most powerful natural reinforcer is orgasm, which means that there is no neurological equivalent to streaming and masturbating to pornography. You can do drugs, you can drink, you can play video games, you can do whatever you want to elevate your dopamine, but none of that will have the power to sculpt your sexual brain circuitry the way that pornography does, especially...
Sean's not aware of the visual novel genre or the dating sim, apparently, if he thinks that sex and video games have nothing to do with each other. What do you think John's Steam account looks like?
If you're watching it at a young age when your brain is the most plastic and susceptible to that. And this is where it starts to get kind of dangerous because you have to take into account the binge mechanism that is programmed into your brain for what your brain perceives will help your survival, things like food and sex. And whenever you binge things like food and sex, your brain thinks that you've hit the jackpot and it neurochemically reacts to incentivize you to keep going. Like it literally overrides any instinct to stop because you're full or because you've had enough. So this being the case, you can understand the problem that we've created in the last 15 years where your brain thinks that internet pornography has provided to it conceivably endless mating opportunities, so to speak. As long as you have an internet connection, you can go forever and you'll never consume all the available content. And your brain was not designed, nor is it prepared to handle that kind of nonstop stimulation. So
I would argue that you could argue the same thing, redundant. I would argue that you could say the same thing about access to food today as, how do I put this? Access to food today as compared to, like, I don't know, the 1800s. I have more access to food than the vast majority of my ancestors. So if I get hungry, I go and eat. Now, I have disordered eating, so I eat even if I'm not hungry, which isn't good. And certainly a lot of Americans do have problems with overindulging in terms of caloric intake. I would completely agree with that. And I'm sure the number of people who are engaging in self-pleasure activity, let's say, might be at a higher rate today than it was in the past due to access to materials like pornography. But the difference being something like eating a bunch of pizza or eating anything that's unhealthy for you, that has like physical detriments to the body. And again, the sources that, not even sources, the claims that John has been making about the effects on the brain don't appear to be very substantiated in terms of like normal people viewing porn on a regular basis and not people who are actively addicted to pornography. Of course, he thinks the groups are one and the same, but they're really not. And I think the vast majority of people in the world recognize that distinction.
What does it do? What does the brain, particularly the young male brain, do when it has unlimited access to a super stimulating reward that it never evolved to handle? It tends to adapt, but not in a good way. Remember what we just talked about with the substance or chemical addictions? How it restructures the brain works the same way with behavioral addictions. We just covered how sexual arousal and addictive drugs like meth and cocaine stimulate the same group of reward system nerve cells while triggering the same mechanisms in your brain that make you crave more. And so given that, it's not surprising that sexual conditioning through pornography and drug use involve the same general brain changes, which are changes involving sensitization. And this is where it starts to get really interesting. Basically, the neurochemical events that create sensitization are caused by spikes of dopamine, but the actual thing in your brain that produces it is our friend from earlier, that protein delta phosphate. And essentially what happens is that dopamine surges trigger the production of delta phosphate, and it then slowly accumulates in the reward circuitry of your brain in proportion to the amount of dopamine that you release when you chronically indulge in your natural reward of choice, sex, junk food, those drugs that we mentioned earlier, whatever. And the protein delta phosphate is referred to as a transcription factor because it activates a very specific set of genes to physically and chemically alter the reward circuitry of your brain in order to chase that dopamine. It essentially reacts to the behavior that triggers the dopamine release in order to program your brain to remember and then want to repeat those behaviors. And so with things like pornography, given the way that it exists, that we talked about earlier, your brain ends up being literally rewired to exponentially crave whatever you've been binging on. So that's where you get into a spiral where you want something, you do it, you secrete lots of dopamine, causes delta phosphate to accumulate, that makes the initial urge even stronger, then it rinses and repeats, and it gets stronger every time. This is based on the phrase that we mentioned earlier, neurons that fire together wire together, because your brain will strengthen the connection of those cells with repeated activation. And when you link together the nerve cells for sexual excitement with the nerve cells for storing the information associated with that, which would be what you're watching, where you're watching it, how you're watching it, etc., it further cements the whole process in your brain, because now you'll have totally normal things in your life serving as triggers, which I know is something that we laugh at whenever the left says it, but it's a real thing. So if your parents leave and you suddenly have an urge to watch pornography,
So you're agreeing that being triggered is a real thing. You just don't like when people on the left use it? Cool.
On your phone, you suddenly had that.
Baha, who is a fourth-year PhD candidate in developmental genetics, says, LMAO, that's not what a transcription factor is, John.
Urge, whatever it may be in your case, that's why. Your brain has strengthened the association between your sexual excitement and the things that exist independently of and adjacent to that excitement, which makes it so that when you notice those things, or maybe even when you don't notice them, it triggers sexual excitement regardless, because you have rewired your brain. Literally the same way that heroin addicts can be triggered by the sight of needles, alcoholics can be
Catalina Gearbox with $5 says, I'm drinking to the death of Rush Limbaugh. Invite everyone to join me. Oh boy. Please be responsible.
Triggered by the smell of alcohol. It's the same brain mechanisms. And these brain changes tend to keep us over-consuming because your brain wasn't designed to handle this level of stimuli. And so it thinks it's just temporarily binging. It doesn't have the capacity to sustainably handle the infinite supply of these supernormal stimuli. And this leads to both addiction and sexual conditioning. So with this, there's good and bad news. The good news is that when you break your addiction, your levels of delta phosphate will drop to normal levels after about 2 months. But the bad news is that the neurological pathways that have been sensitized will remain as such for much longer, and possibly even for your whole life, which means that eventually, yeah, the cravings won't be as strong, but if you give in to them again, you'll be back to square one pretty quickly. And I know this might be boring or confusing, but this in itself completely destroys the
It's the first one. It's boring.
idea that pornography addiction does not exist. The fact that delta phosphate...
I don't think anyone is claiming that pornography... Let me put it this way. No one reasonable is claiming that no one has pornography addiction, John. Pornography addiction absolutely exists, but that's not your claim. Your claim at the beginning of the video is anyone who engages with pornography on any sort of regular basis, even if it's like a once-a-month thing, is an addict. And that's a ridiculous claim.
Accumulates in the reward center of the brain is now considered to be a sustained molecular switch for both behavioral and chemical addictions. And anyone who tells you otherwise is coping because they're slaves to their carnal desires. Now here's where it starts to get bad, because once you're stuck in that cycle where you're craving it, and then the more you indulge in it, the more you crave it, etc., your brain actually has a mechanism to try to get you to chill out. And it's a molecule called CREB, we'll call it CREB. And it dampens your pleasure response basically by inhibiting dopamine. And it's your brain's way of trying to make you chill out on whatever you're binging on, make it less enjoyable so you just kind of relax for a second. And this molecule is actually produced alongside delta phosphate when you secrete high levels of dopamine. And this is done because at the end of the day, your body's just trying to help you out a little bit, trying to keep you under control, trying to tell you a couple thousand years ago that it's time to leave the blueberry bush, go check on the kids, whatever it may be. But that was long before the utter catastrophe of high-speed internet. So now you have these incredibly powerful reinforcers that override those satiation mechanisms in your brain due to the manner in which they exist. The blueberry bush is much different than an evening spent on Pornhub while drinking Baja Blast and smoking marijuana, basically.
I'll drink some Baja Blast.
This results in desensitization, or in other words, tolerance, which as we know just means that you need more of something to achieve the same effect. And as we also know, this is a key feature of addiction. And with pornography, that might mean watching more of it, watching more extreme versions of it, whatever it may be. And we've already talked about how that type of increased stimulation will elevate your dopamine and confuse you emotionally, etc. But here's a huge takeaway, probably even the biggest takeaway for the average viewer, and that is the fact that the effects of Krebs are not limited to just pornography, because it doesn't exist just for pornography. It exists to dull the effects of pleasure. And as a result of this, you will start to notice that things in your life that you used to enjoy, like hanging out with your friends, watching movies, playing video games, whatever, you'll notice that they aren't as enjoyable to you anymore. They seem less interesting or even dull. That's because of Krebs. It leaves you bored and less...
Or people have depression. People also have depression. A lot of people have depression these days, John. Everything is fucked!
Satisfied with your normal life and its activities, which leaves you searching for and prioritizing whatever can elevate your dopamine just so you can feel something again, which for many of us means watching pornography. Now at this point, you might be asking yourself, now wait a minute. How can watching pornography increase and decrease my dopamine levels at the same time? Good question. It all comes down to the sequence of events. That's the increase of dopamine activity with sensitization and delta phos-B, and then there's a decrease of dopamine activity with desensitization and Krebs. And so for this to make sense, you kind of have to understand, the difference in how your brain regards what you want versus what it likes. So basically, when you're triggered by something to be sexually aroused, the sensitization will cause your dopamine to be spiked. You'll have really strong cravings before you actually start indulging them. Remember that dopamine is the searching for pleasure chemical, not simply just the pleasure chemical. And then once you indulge those cravings, less dopamine and less...
Goddamn, he is repeating himself a lot.
Opioids are secreted, which is the desensitization, which makes it less pleasurable to you than before, which increases your cravings for more, etc. So it's a dangerous cycle to get into because it simultaneously drives your compulsive use while...
Once we hit an hour in this video, I might honestly split this into 2 parts. Today and tomorrow. Maybe I'll do the second part. I'm definitely streaming tomorrow just because this is fucking arduous.
Increasing the fulfillment that you get from that use along with from everyday activities in general, which will make you numb and miserable over time. And this can be corroborated by brain scans that show that pornography addicts have greater activation in their reward systems during the craving phase, but also that they don't actually enjoy pornography more than people who aren't addicted to it. So now, given what we know about how the brain is affected, do you understand how terrible this is, especially for young people whose brains are still the most plastic, whose brains are still developing?
John, the paper itself even makes a distinction between average porn users and porn addicts. Therefore, if you're going to cite that paper, you should also be able to admit that most people are not porn addicts like you're claiming. They're a subset of a group of people who watch adult material.
We are the guinea pigs. We are experiencing a sexual conditioning that our parents could not have even begun to emulate with their Playboys and VHS tapes. Our entire frame of reference for sexuality has been established for us in the form of mass-produced, mass-marketed super stimuli that...
I mean, maybe you. I've had sexual experiences though, John, so no, mine aren't. I'm an adult person. That would be like saying... How do I put this? Saying that... porn has changed my expectations of sex would be like saying watching The Avengers has changed my expectation of my vacation to New York City. Like, sure, The Avengers takes place in New York City, at least part of the movie, but I don't expect when I go to New York City I'm gonna see aliens fighting superheroes in the streets. You know what I mean? Porn is just that. It's adult movies. They're movies. They're fake. They're entertainment. It's not meant to be something that's real. I think most people know that.
Exist to addict you for the profit of a select few. It's warping our sexual desires. It's warping our sexual preferences. It's literally making us depressed, as we've discussed. It's making us less attracted to real women. It gives us erectile dysfunction, and it's only going to get worse.
It makes you less attracted. John. Do you think John is secretly like a sex-repulsed asexual and he doesn't know? And he doesn't understand why all us filthy degenerates want to engage with adult material?
Brand that would suggest that it gets better because nobody's talking about this. No one wants to take action because everyone's addicted to it. Even back in 2004, as early as 2004, almost 20 years ago, there was a study done by Swedish researchers that found that 99% of young men had consumed pornography and that more than half of them felt...
Yeah, I would imagine that statistic is... probably about the same throughout most of human history, even if we're talking about someone drawing a little stick figure with boobies and jerking off to it, people's standards for porn were probably lower in the past, but they were certainly masturbating. Let's put it that way.
Felt that it had an impact on their sexual behavior. Fast forward to 2016, we have data that shows that 49% of men report viewing pornography that was not previously interesting to them or that they once even considered to be, quote, disgusting. What's more is that fully 20...
Wow, we should probably make people more comfortable with engaging with kinks that are not harmful to people, huh? So they don't have to describe pornography that they view as disgusting.
% of them admitted to using pornography to, quote, maintain arousal with my partner. You see the problem there? You understand what's wrong with that? Using the artificial to which you have warped and grounded your desires in order to successfully partake in the natural.
All right, John, if you ever have erectile dysfunction, I better not catch you taking Viagra, because that's unnatural. If God gives you the floppy dick, you get floppy dick. Period.
And the real, think about this for a second, and please don't answer aloud. And again, there's no shame in this because everyone is a victim of this in some capacity, but just think to yourself about the most repulsive thing that you've ever gotten off to. I know you know what it is.
Ooh,
and I know.
Let me think. Hold on. This is gonna be tough. Hold on. I actually don't have anything in particular that I would consider repulsive, I don't think. Hold on. Let me think. No, nothing repulsive. He would probably find it repulsive. But, like, nothing harmful. Nothing involving gross stuff. It's just, you know, normal shit, more or less. Baha's seen the stuff I've looked at before. Don't say anything, Baha. That's true. John does think anal is repulsive.
Know that you know that it's wrong in a clear mind. Now think about how tragic it is that there are people making money off getting 11-year-old boys to watch the same type of stuff, or even more repulsive stuff.
John, it's so disingenuous to couch this conversation as if it's about children, when it's really not. It's a parent's responsibility to ensure that their kids aren't engaging with material they don't want them to. If you don't want your kids seeing pornography, set up a block. It's pretty easy to do.
Think about whether you've ever had to use pornography to sustain yourself while having sex with your partner. Do you understand the problem with that? Do you understand why that's wrong? And, you know, we'll talk more about this when we get into the societal effects of this stuff, but I want you to just be thinking about that as we go along, because recognizing the degree to which this problem exists or has manifested in your life is keystone to solving it and liberating yourself from it. And with young people, I want to get back to what we talked about earlier with neurons that fire together, wire together, and the association between sexual arousal and the other adjacent factors, because one of the most important things that happens to us as we go through puberty, and our brains are still developing until we're like 24, 25, is that we both consciously and unconsciously learn about sex. And part of how this is accomplished is by your brain wiring to respond to sexual cues in your environments. And adolescents wire together these experiences with arousal much faster and much more easily than young adults do, despite an age difference of only a few years. And teenagers are especially vulnerable because their entire reward circuitry is basically just an overdrive the whole time. And as a result of that, they experience an exaggerated version of the cycle that we discussed earlier, which means that they experience higher spikes of dopamine, but also they become bored more easily. And this is because they are more sensitive to dopamine, and they also produce more delta phos-B. So because the adolescent brain is overly sensitive to reward, it is much more vulnerable to addiction. And the scary thing about that is that your brain as an adolescent neurochemically urges you to define sex by whatever offers the biggest buzz, so to speak, which is why the effects of pornography are not the same
Again,
in adolescence.
John made fun of asking for sources for some reason, probably because he's not giving it. What's your source on that claim? What are you talking about?
Adults. And this is confirmed by brain scans from a Cambridge study in 2014, because basically your brain naturally sculpts itself to narrow a teen's choices by the time they reach adulthood. And this is because the nerve connections in your brain are governed by a fairly straightforward policy of like use it or lose it, which allows your responses to life to be well honed theoretically. And this is why after you reach about 12, your brain actually like shrinks because billions of nerve connections are pruned and reorganized. But the point is that as a teenager, you can literally condition pornography to be your entire sexual frame of reference. You can do this so easily, and you've probably already done it to a certain extent, such that real sex with a real woman can actually feel like a weird experience to you.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Is John accidentally projecting here? John, if you don't want to have sex with women, don't have sex with women. That's okay. You don't have to. But the Guys, how do I help John? How do I help John? Because if he's genuinely feeling weird with, like, this...
or it's less interesting to you because it's deviant from your sexual frame of reference. And this damage is not easy to undo, my friends. I am begging you with tears in my eyes to quit watching this now. Your most powerful and lasting memories and habits all arise during adolescence. And while you can liberate yourself from some of this artificial sexual conditioning that we've unfortunately all probably had to experience, it can still be a deep scar in your brain. And the longer you're subject to this conditioning, the worse it's going to be. Break the conditioning, Western man. Your ancestors did great things back when it was harder to see boobs. That's like... it's literally not a coincidence. Like, we know that your sexuality can be conditioned, and we know that it is even more likely to happen during adolescence. We talked about this earlier, how these associations are formed in your brain with things that aren't even explicitly sexual, and we've confirmed this empirically by doing studies where men view pornography at the same time they view something like a boot or a jar of pennies. And after a while, they become aroused by simply viewing the boot or the pennies without the pornography even present, because
yeah, that's conditioning. That's classical conditioning.
They formed that association in their brains because they have been conditioned. This type of conditioning can affect all sorts of things, including...
just hear what that sicko Pavlov did to his dogs. He made him mouth horny for the bell.
Certain visuals, certain objects, scents, even things like animal costumes or sexual partners of the same sex. That's a red pill that most people aren't ready for.
I just referred to being hungry as mouth horny, and I don't like it.
There's a strong argument to be made that taking into account what we've gone over throughout this video, you can understand the path of a prematurely and overly sexualized young man watching more extreme types of pornography, things that make them anxious, things that they know are wrong because those feelings elevate them. They help them to chase that elevated dopamine. And eventually conditioning himself literally to be a furry or to be sexually attracted to men.
Is he implying that pornography is responsible for gay people existing? John, let me introduce you to literally all of ancient Greece. John, gay people exist. Trans people exist. It's fine. It's not the result of pornography. Oh, God.
Sure, a lot of it comes down to prenatal hormone exposure in terms of what is ultimately predictive of its manifestation, but the bottom line is that science has never...
Fellas, is it gay to watch straight porn?
...found a gay gene, and it's certainly never going to find a furry gene. Do with that as you will.
How do they normally name genes? Like, what's the if someone found a furry gene and didn't call it, like, ooh-woo 669 or something, then we failed as a species, okay? Baja, go find the furry gene and call it ooh-woo, okay?
Found out through other brain scan studies that not only can these associations be formed with completely random things like squares or pictures of trees.
Oh, whoa, 420.
But also that pornography addicts form these associations in their brains faster and more intensely than those who are not addicted to pornography. But the good news is that as it pertains to this type of conditioning, your brain will return to normal after a few months free from whatever you've conditioned it to be aroused to. It will evolve, but backwards. And then once you're in that normal state of mind again, you'll realize how weird those things were.
If only there were a word for evolve, but backwards. Our language has devolved so much, we don't even have a word for that.
And the magnitude of the conditioning that you'd undergone. And what's a very important but perhaps not so obvious consequence of that conditioning? Your pee-pee literally stops working. You as a man have sacrificed the functionality of your pee-pee at the altar of screen whores. Your ancestors aren't mad, they're just disappointed. But before we talk about why this happens, another personal question that I implore you not to answer aloud. Do you still get morning wood, bro? Remember, you'd wake up, you have to go pee, and you have to, like, lean over the toilet until your torso is parallel with your pee-pee. It was a challenge, but it built character, damn it.
Okay, first of all, John, that's something that goes away to an extent with age when you're someone with a penis anyway. Secondly, me personally, I'm on hormones. But before hormones, yes, I did. And I've been a regular viewer of adult material, who knows, since at least high school, right? And yes, I continued to have that phenomena happen to me every day up until I started using hormones regularly.
But the point is that a lot of guys don't even have that anymore, and they haven't really noticed it or given it too much thought, but that's a problem. Another problem, we talked about this earlier, symptom of this, being unable to sustain yourself or even get it up, so to speak, when engaging with real women. And I apologize if this is vulgar, but like, come on, man, we're literally talking about pornography here. So to expect TVY7 caliber dialogue would just be unrealistic. But this too is part of erectile dysfunction caused by pornography. And before we get into the data, simply understand that it is not normal for young men to be in these positions and not be good to go. But anyways, there's a couple dozen studies linking sexual dysfunction to pornography use because of everything that we talked about earlier.
I could believe that. I would imagine there's a certain subset of people, probably people who would fall under pornography addicted people who probably do have that problem. That would not surprise me.
And this is the part where the pornography addicts chime in like, causation does not equal correlation. And it's like, wow, dude, I also have taken statistics 101. Sick, bro. I almost wish I'd gone to college so that I could write incredibly pretentious academic papers on concepts that I noticed that are just basically posts. Like this one in particular, I see it everywhere. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. I like to refer to it as the horseshoe theory of practical intelligence. And it's basically that in terms of practical intelligence, there is greater unity between those with above average intelligence and below average intelligence than there is between people with average intelligence in either of the aforementioned groups. So the both ends of the bell curve kind of come together like a horseshoe. And what I think this really comes down to is that people with average intelligence, people who are mediocre, they're still smart enough to realize that they're smarter than some people. And so they cope with their feelings of mediocrity by asserting themselves over those people in ways that are just often incorrect. I'll give you an example. Defund the police. Go ask any stupid person. And I don't mean someone who you disagree with politically. I mean like a legitimately unintelligent person. Ask them what they think about defunding the police. And they will tell you, now wait just a minute. That's about the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Who's going to catch the criminals, etc. I can only make fun of white people or else I'll get banned. And, you know, if you ask someone with average intelligence, someone who's unexceptional, someone who's probably college educated, go ask them. That's when you're going to get the answer, the IQ of 104. Hey, what do you think about the police? Those are the people who will tell you, well, crime is caused by circumstance. We need social workers to handle these cases, etc. Whereas if you told an unintelligent person that social workers could prevent these things, they would just laugh at you. Because while they may be unintelligent, they've actually retained more common sense than those with average intelligence because they actually need it to survive and get by in the world. Whereas people with average intelligence don't necessarily need that common sense because they have greater access to opportunity. And of course, if you ask someone with above average intelligence about defunding the police, they'll just laugh at you as well. It's like the sleep woke bespoke meme. And it's the same with this. You got the low IQ people who will say, well, gosh dang it, I don't want my son watching that internet pornography. He's gonna rot his mind. You got the average IQ people like, actually, studies that have corroborated that have only found associations, and causation does not equal correlation. I am so smart. And then the high IQ people are like, hey, we're not talking about random variables. Like, for example, the fact that there's almost a perfect correlation between US crude oil imports and the domestic per capita consumption of chicken. We're not talking about that. We're actually talking about what we know about neurobiology and neuropsychology, and we're applying.
Let's be clear. John, you don't know anything about neurobiology or neuropsychology. Neither do I. But you don't either! So let's not pretend you do, okay?
Applying that appropriately and saying, hey, given what we know about this, we predict that with this new epidemic of pornography consumption, this is what's probably going to happen. These are the effects that will manifest. And then, oh, wait a minute, exactly what would logically be expected to happen has happened, and it's reflected in our research. But then the 104 IQ people are like, no, but I must be smart. Causation does not equal correlation. Those are my least favorite types of people. Everyone thinks I'm a eugenicist. I want to get rid of the lower people. I just want to get rid of the people in the middle. They're annoying. Low IQ nationalism, I'm here for it. Lower people, I just want to get rid of the people in the middle. They're annoying. Low IQ nationalism, I'm here for it.
Can I get a clip, please? Clip. Someone clip. Thank you.
But that aside, it's also basically impossible to do experiments on this, the effects of this type of stuff because you can't find a control group of men who haven't been exposed to it anymore. We'll get more into that in a second, but essentially what happens is that because of your sexual conditioning, you have certain expectations wired into your brain. And dopamine will elevate when something is better than you expected, but it'll also drop when something isn't as good as you expected. And once you've conditioned yourself to internet pornography, real sex is never going to be able to meet that expectation because it can't compete with all of the variables that classify it as a supernormal stimuli. stimuli. And resultantly, your unconscious expectations probably won't be met, and your dopamine will drop, which means your pee-pee will drop, because you need consistent dopamine to maintain sexual arousal and a functioning pee-pee. When it comes to pee-pee functionality, I trust the science, and the science says that you need adequate dopamine in your reward circuitry and in the sexual centers of your brain. And obviously, there are different types of erectile dysfunction. Sometimes it's caused by things like blood vessels or nerve problems, but we're talking about psychological causes. And if you look at scans of gray matter in the brain's reward center, in the brain's sexual centers, in the hypothalamus, you'll find that lost gray matter equates with loss of nerve cell branches and connections with other nerve cells, which means that it's not just performance anxiety, but it can also be a literal consequence of changes to the reward circuitry of your brain, which have resulted in persistently reduced dopamine signaling, which explains why your morning wood is gone and why it's going to take months to come back once you start to break this conditioning. And this matches the results of another brain scan study conducted in Germany and published in JAMA Psychiatry. The results are less gray matter and general desensitization, which is what we talked about earlier. And you can measure things like gray matter and desensitization in a brain scan, but the nucleus of your sexual conditioning, so to speak, the real magnitude of it can't be articulated on paper by some lab coat. That's something that will ultimately be dependent on your level of honesty and self-understanding. But to get back into the addiction components of it, because anybody who hears this can just dismiss it by saying, well, as long as it's not addictive, who cares? You can just stop anytime you want. We've already talked about those types of people and classified them properly as people who are basically coping by rationalizing their sexual degeneracy. We've also talked about the...
Oh, I don't need to rationalize my sexual degeneracy. I love it.
Characteristics of this addiction, specifically that just like substance addiction, it elevates your dopamine significantly, which is why the same nerve cells are active as when cocaine and methamphetamine are used, and that this is different from all other natural rewards. And even though addictions are not all the same, we still know that they all essentially cause the same core changes to your brain, which can be summarized basically as a craving and preoccupation with doing whatever it is that you're addicted to, a loss of control with how much you're doing it and the ways in which you're doing it, and also the negative consequences of you doing it, whether those are financial, physical, mental, social, doesn't matter. So
again, John, if you're having physical, mental, I'm sorry, I'm tired. I had a long day. If you're having physical, mental, financial issues with pornography usage, then yes, you have an addiction, and that's something that you need to address, either on your own or with the help of a therapist or something, whatever. But that's not most people who watch pornography, John. You're using people... How do I put this? It would be like me pointing at alcoholics and saying, okay, so all alcohol should be banned, even though a majority of people handle alcohol just fine and can do so reasonably responsibly. That's not how this works.
So what's interesting about this is that
it's so funny because he so often is like, oh, personal responsibility is great and it's people's own problems, and there aren't like, how do I put this? There aren't systemic issues in regard to like racial problems, but all of a sudden it's a systemic issue that people watch porn, and he thinks this is something that needs to be addressed. John Doyle doesn't just want to tell you porn is bad. John Doyle would ban porn legally if he could. Like, it's just very, very ridiculous.
Know that the substances that follow this pattern can and do create addictions, but they're much more infrequent than you would think. It only causes about 10 to 15% of human and animal test subjects to become addicted when trials are conducted. But we have to be very careful with the conclusions that we're drawing from this.
So you just admitted 10 to 15% of people who watch porn regularly are in that, like, hyper category of people who are considered addicts, yet you're still talking about pornography in general as if it is a problem for most people. I'm curious what percentage of people who, like, drink are addicted, like, and I mean, like, alcoholic addicted to drinking. I wonder if it's a higher or lower percentage. Let me see. Just curious. What percent of drinkers are alcoholics? 10% of U.S. adults who drink too much are alcoholics, so about the same. 10 to 15% is what he said. This says 10%. So it just appears that with any pleasurable activity, and this is only 2 data points, so bear that in mind, I recognize that. But at least with that, it doesn't seem that out of line. A pleasurable activity, about 10 to 15% of the population will become addicted to that, probably because that's about the amount of a population who has sort of an addictive personality, or has that sort of reward system that works specifically in the ways that he's describing. But that's not the majority of people. And for the same... Whatever. John, do you? I'm just so over it at this point.
Because it's not that we're safe from addiction, but rather that we're relatively safe from those specific addictions. But in terms of natural rewards, things like those supernormal stimuli that we discussed earlier, things like junk food, you're not safe at all. Why is this? Why is it that even if you're not susceptible to addiction, why is it that you can still get extremely addicted to supernormal stimuli in the forms of junk food and pornography? I don't know. Maybe because your brain is designed to pursue food and sex. Maybe that's why. Food and sex are S tier, drugs and alcohol are lower. How many people are addicted to drugs and alcohol? I don't know, but I do know that 70% of American adults are overweight and fully 37% of them are obese. That's going to cause a lot more deaths than drugs are. Libertarians are like, yeah, he wants a small government to legalize all drugs. Nice try. I actually want a big government to usher in state-enforced physical fitness. That's a joke. Kind of. The point is that we know what... that supernormal stimulus is doing to American society. Now, what if you had one that was available in even greater quantity, novelty, and it was totally free? Not good, folks. Not good. And it's difficult to find data on this because it tends to be something done in private, but we've got data from 2014 that found that 33% of men between the ages of 18 and 30 either thought they were addicted or were unsure, which is significantly more than the just 5% of men between the ages of 15 and 68 who felt the same. Then we've got two studies from 2016, both found that it was about 28%. Now, even ignoring what we know about the upward trends in terms of how many people are addicted, the age at which they're getting addicted, and even ignoring how catastrophic it would be for society if even just 28 or 33% of the men were addicted to pornography, which we'll elaborate upon later. I'm going to just go ahead and assert that about 85% of men in this country are addicted to porn. 85%, that's the...
You literally took the inverse of the stat. The stat earlier said 10 to 15%, and you're literally flipping it to say, actually, no, it's the opposite? That's not how statistics work. You can't just say, I think 85%... Okay. I think 99% of John's audience are idiots. Anyone could just make up numbers, John.
The figure. What's my source? My feelings.
What? Well, there it is, isn't it? What do you want me to do with that, John? What the fuck do you want me to do with that?
Feel that this is true. And if you've consumed pornography in the last 365 days, you're not allowed to dispute this because your consciousness is corrupted by desire and addiction.
If you have coomed in the last year, then you are a degenerate. You gotta be like John. John never cooms, okay? He's a real American, okay? No American lets any woman touch his pee-pee, okay? What the fuck, John?
You simply can't see the same things that I can see. Your third eye is calcified by the smut and tarnish of lust.
Oh no, my third eye is very cleared out. I cleared that pipe earlier this week.
At least 85%, and anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to hurt you. All jokes aside, one of the first figures that we went over was 80% of men watching pornography at least once a week. Given what we've been talking about, I find it very hard to believe that they're not addicted. And then I myself...
Why? Again, Sean, you're a college graduate who wears a suit in his parents' house and films internet videos. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not doing much better. I'm a college dropout, but at least I own my own house, and that's pretty nice. Neither of us are qualified to make statements on this except to rebut each other. Just seems stupid.
Threw in an extra 5% for good measure. There we have it, 85% at least. And remember, anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to hurt.
Did I say college graduate? I meant he's a high school graduate and I'm a college dropout. My bad.
You. Now, that being said, a lot of people, even in the medical and scientific fields, think that, well, we can't use what we know about addiction to understand compulsive behaviors like gambling and pornography use, and there's just no such thing as a behavioral addiction. That's what they say. Only substance addictions, like with heroin and the other drugs that
I think most people recognize that there are things other than actual physical dependence. Like, addiction is different than dependence. You can be physically dependent on certain things and not on other things. Like, weed is a good example. You can become addicted to weed. People laugh at that, but you can. You can become addicted to anything that makes you feel good, but you aren't physically dependent like you can get on alcohol or heroin or meth or some of those other drugs.
I mentioned earlier.
Basically, the difference being you go into, like, physical withdrawals if you stop having that drug or whatever it happens to be.
And this is often promoted by the media, but the most updated research that we have actually contradicts this idea. For example, if you look in the DSM-5, addiction is one of the only mental disorders that can be reproduced at will in a laboratory setting. In other words, we know exactly how to make animals and people addicted to something, and we can do it whenever we want to. Wouldn't it be a shame if oligarchs use this knowledge to harm and profit off our society? Okay, relax. The point is that we can...
Oh, so John's beef is with capitalism again. Cool.
Study what happens to the brain in these settings, even down to the molecular level. And what we find with thousands of brain studies, whether it's addiction to methamphetamine, heroin, whatever, is that all addictions modify the same fundamental brain mechanisms and produce a recognized set of anatomical and chemical alterations. There is no doubt amongst addiction experts that behavioral and chemical addictions are fundamentally the same. We've got like 230 brain studies on internet addicts that reveal the same.
They're very much physically different. Your pleasure centers are probably going to be affected very similarly, but when we're talking about like physical dependence, it involves like what happens if you stop taking heroin cold turkey or stop taking alcohol cold turkey if you're like a severe alcoholic and you have those symptoms. That's a physical dependence as opposed to an addiction, and you can have an addiction and a physical dependence. They aren't mutually exclusive terms.
Same changes that we've been talking about in substance addicts. So if we know that the internet is addictive, it's evident that contemporary pornography is as well. And sure enough, this is confirmed by the brain studies on people who watch pornography.
Baha, who again is a fourth-year PhD candidate in developmental genetics, says, how does he think he has the authority to say, quote, there is no doubt by the experts that this, ... That would be because John is a big boy who wears a suit and a tie. And that gives him the authority to say whatever he wants. He's a high school graduate, okay? He knows what he's talking about.
There was a landmark review.
I will cut this in two. At the hour mark, we're gonna pause until tomorrow, and I'll finish it on tomorrow's stream. Sorry, guys. I didn't mean to be so sleepy.
You done recently, which outlined the 4 fundamental brain changes caused by addiction. They might ring a bell, and they are sensitization, desensitization, dysfunctional prefrontal circuitry, and a malfunctioning stress system. And studies on contemporary pornography users find evidence of each of these. Start with the first one, sensitization. That can be defined as an unconscious supermemory of pleasure, which when activated triggers powerful cravings. Your parents leave, all of a sudden you feel compelled to watch pornography. You're stressed out, same thing happens. You see a model on Instagram, that's what that is.
That's interesting. I guess I've heard other people say that. I've never been stressed out and decided to like partake in that particular activity in order to relieve that stress. I don't know. I just would rather be relaxed if I'm going into that sort of activity, I guess.
There's about 20 studies reporting sensitization and cue reactivity in pornography users. And even when you try to quit or you don't use it for a while, those sensitized pathways are still there and they grow even stronger for a while. Your reward system is literally begging you to stimulate it. And with that sensitization amplified, your brain's reward center uses the same mechanisms involved in normal learning and memory. And it might get weaker once you quit after a while, but they're going to remain there for a very long time, depending on how intense your addiction was. That's why so many anti-addiction organizations advocate complete abstinence from whatever you're addicted to, because anything else will sustain those developed pathways, which won't allow you to get better. And then we get into the second one, which is desensitization, which is basically a numbed response to that pleasure. This is typically the first addiction-related brain change that addicts notice. Basically, the reduced dopamine and opioid signaling leaves you less sensitive to everyday pleasures and starving for things that will raise those levels again. And this is the cycle of tolerance with which we're all familiar. You need more of something to achieve the previous effect, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And we talked earlier about how your brain will release CREB to inhibit dopamine in your reward circuitry, which will then decrease as you abstain from your vice. But this itself doesn't really explain why people still feel numb and depressed even months after quitting their vice. And that's because the more lasting causes would be things like lost gray matter, declining dopamine and opioid receptors, which literally means that instead of your brain just protecting itself from excessive stimulation with CREB, it's also going to remove some of your receptors so that you're less sensitive to the stimulation. It literally removes your D2 receptors so that you're less sensitive to the stimulation. And D2 receptors just so happen to help control cravings. So without them, your cravings are going to be that much harder to control. On the bright side, your brain can rebuild these receptors over time, but you're going to have to quit frying your reward circuitry first. And it's this imbalance that is the biggest driver of addiction. You're dealing with incredibly powerful cravings that keep increasing in intensity and then experiencing less pleasure in everyday life because of desensitization, which makes you gravitate towards the things that give you the most dopamine because you just want to feel something, basically. Remember, fellas, you're not horny, you're just depressed.
John, people can be both.
And there have been at least 6 studies confirming these neurological effects in pornography users. After that,
I think that describes a good portion of my audience. Horny and depressed.
Get into the dysfunctional prefrontal circuitry, which manifests as your willpower being weakened, and you become hyper-reactive to the cues that trigger your behavior. And this is because your prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that basically governs your actions. It's where you plan things, evaluate consequences, costs, benefits, etc. And most importantly, it governs your willpower and tells you not to do things that you might regret later. And there are two types of pathways extended into our reward system from it. One of them says do it, the other says don't do it. So if the emotional centers in your reward system want you to hit somebody, the prefrontal cortex will be like, hey there guy, let's think about this first. But with addiction, the pathways that encourage behavior become increasingly powerful, while the pathways that discourage and inhibit behavior become increasingly weak. It's literally like you've got, the angel and the devil on your shoulder, but the angel's just a regular dude, and the devil's pumping steroids into himself. He's like Bane. And we found physical evidence of this in fMRI studies and also evidence through specialized psychological testing. And this can be reflected in at least 13 studies of pornography users. And then the last one, the malfunctioning stress system, which means that your cravings are strong.
Baha says, okay, but John, what if you replace all this porn with sex? Like, if one tanks your reward system, the other would too, so should people not have sex either? That's what I'm saying. Doesn't really make sense.
Stronger, your willpower is weaker, you've got a lot of withdrawal symptoms. This is because your stress system is a little bit more nuanced than just fight or flight. It also modifies your brain to protect itself from long-term stressors. And experts view addiction as a stress disorder because it not only affects your stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, but it also induces several changes in your brain's stress system. And there are 3 changes in particular that make it extremely difficult to quit. The first is that stress increases dopamine and cortisol, which means that even something only slightly stressful can trigger your cravings, even if there's nothing to trigger it directly. The sensitized addiction pathways are already there, and those in themselves are enough. The second one is that stress inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which means that your impulse control and ability to fully comprehend the consequences of your actions are both inhibited. And lastly, when you're
Stone Corbell says, so experts are good here, but not in studies that refute what you're saying. That's the funny thing. There are plenty of experts who will be like, hey, porn's fine in moderation like all things. There are even studies that do show, like, it can be stress relieving, again, as long as you're not in some sort of sex addiction. You don't have some sort of sex addiction or whatever. Major, like, medical associations like the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association are on board with transition in terms of trans people, but I doubt John cares about experts in that case because it disagrees with what he's saying. Kind of funny. Republicans love sources and experts when they think it backs up their case. But when it doesn't, all of a sudden they're elitists. They're elitist liberals.
Addicted to something and you don't give it to your brain basically freaks out and your stress system goes into overdrive. This is what causes withdrawal symptoms like anxiety, depression, being tired, insomnia, irritability, mood swings, etc. If this sounds like you, take note of that. Remember, you're not depressed, you're just addicted to pornography. We've got 3 studies that demonstrate these dysfunctional stress systems in pornography users, and even one of them showed that it was epigenetically altering your stress genes. So to summarize these 4 neuroplastic brain changes, you're like, hey, this is epic. Your brain's like, yeah, do more. Your brain's like, no, this isn't epic. In fact, very little of anything is epic anymore. And then your brain's like, do more of the originally epic thing. And your brain's also like, I literally just can't even stop you at this point. And then collectively, no one's having a good time. Basically, you get the point. And coon brains used to be like, there's no such thing as porn addiction. No symptoms. We need studies. And so in 2017, we had 2 studies that confirmed these symptoms in pornography users. Another one just with internet addicts who were also pornography addicts. And then 3 more with escalation in tolerance as it pertains to pornography. And then another 14 more with that escalation into weirder genres, which is part of the tolerance aspect of pornography addiction. So basically, we say yet again, anyone who tells you that this isn't real or that it isn't a problem is a coping addict who should not be listened to.
Again, I don't think the vast majority of people say porn addiction isn't real, John. Porn addiction is absolutely real, but it's not something that's suffered by the vast majority of people who partake in adult content. Baha says, I would pay John money if he could give me a correct description of epigenetics. Okay, I'll save this to watch later, and we will finish this up tomorrow. This will be part 1. But gosh, we've been going for I can only handle so much John in one day. So we'll come back and finish that up tomorrow. Let's do a cleanse and then we'll call it a night. What's Sausage Guy up to? Nothing new, at least not from what I saw. I've seen a bunch of He did a mac and cheese sausage, but it's an hour long. I did not see the clip, no. Let's raid Jake if he's... oh, I said I would raid someone else earlier. If someone else has the channel that I said I would raid, then let me know. If they're still
I just want
on.
to get rid of the people in the middle. They're annoying. Low IQ nationalism. I'm here for it. Lower people. I just want to get rid of the people in the middle. They're annoying. Low IQ nationalism. I'm here for it.
Doom NB, is that who it was? Can I get a clip, please? Clip. It was Norman Bello. Okay. Sure. All right. Have a good night, everyone. I'm sorry I was so tired today, but we'll finish this up tomorrow. So, I love you all. You're wonderful. You're wonderful people. You're wonderful. You're the best. Chat's valid and all that good stuff. So yeah, have a wonderful night. Now I'm just waiting for the counter to tick down. I need to go to bed. Ugh. All right, have a good night, everyone. See you guys tomorrow for Chud Watch Part 2. See ya.